All right, colleagues, it is 1 p.m., so I am going to call the 14th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee to order. The City of London is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Pewak, and Attawandaron peoples, and we honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. The City of London is currently home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people today. And as representatives of the people of the City of London, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. The City of London is also committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for our meetings upon request. And to make a request specific to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca or phone 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Colleagues, I am going to begin the meeting by looking for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. And I'm seeing none in chambers, and I'm seeing none in line. I'll advise colleagues that Councillors Van Meerbergen and Hillier are with us online. And Councillor Frank did indicate to me that she is going to try and join online. She is traveling today, so her ability to join us may be impacted somewhat by reliability of Wi-Fi in airports and during her travel, but she is going to make an effort to join us. So I'm going to move along to the consent agenda. We have 5 items. I have been asked to pull 2.1 and 2.2. So I'm going to look to see if there is anything else colleagues wish to have dealt with separately. Seeing none, I'm going to look for a mover and a seconder for the balance of the consent agenda 2.3 through 2.5, moved by Councillor Cuddy, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. And now we'll look for any discussion on those 3 items. Mayor Morgan, Councillor Rahman, whichever one of you, both put your hand up at the same time, so whoever wants to go first, we can rock, paper, scissors, or if one of you wants to yield. Mayor Morgan.
Yes, I'm just going to make a quick comment on Neighborhood Parks Improvement Fund. As colleagues will recall, this was something that was added to the multi-year budget as a business case that I generated, supported by council. We all know through the pandemic the value of our outdoor public spaces is incredibly important to the community for a number of reasons. And moving money in the budget from the Community Investment Reserve Fund, which is filled with surpluses, and returning that to neighborhoods across the city in some way was something that I know we were all supportive of through the budget process. And I want to thank staff for the work that they've done on pulling together a report for information on how they're looking at deploying that across the city. I just want to be clear about the intent that I had when I saw this. You know, there's a number of ways that we have ideas for improving parks in the city. We have a Parks and Rec master plan, which outlines over a 10-year period how we're going to invest in infrastructure and improve it over time. But we also have lots of ideas that was generated through public consultations on parks, neighborhood decision-making, and other pieces, which are community-driven ideas about improving their local spaces in their neighborhoods. This fund allows us to take advantage of a lot of that information that's out there and create some added value improvements in neighborhood parks across the city beyond what they're seeing, and hopefully allow the public to see that each and every part of the city, we're looking at improving our outdoor spaces to make enhancements to them. I know that there's a draft list there. I wouldn't expect colleagues to get into maybe going through that now, but it's nice to have a sense of the types of projects that are considered. And then the map is helpful to see the spread of both existing capital improvement projects as well as where we could, in the short term, provide some improvements, again, with the intent being this is something that needs to touch all wards in the city and needs to reach out widely into the community. So I just wanted to add that context and just say thanks, colleagues, for the support in the budget process. Thanks to our staff for bringing forward this initial look at what the deployment of those funds would look like.
Thank you, Mayor Morgan. I'll go to Councillor Rahman now.
Thank you, and through you. So this is something I'm quite supportive of. I'm glad to see that we are enhancing our local parks. However, I did have some questions related to the criteria by which we selected some of these neighborhood projects. Specifically, my concern is that in, I believe, Ward 7 and perhaps also Ward 9, two of the fastest growing parts of the city, the parks that were selected are parks that are newer parks. And in the case of Kent Park specifically, this is a park that, in my opinion, it's already coming online as a brand-new park, DC funded. And now we're doing some additional enhancements to that park where I know there's concerns around some of the existing parks and the need for some improvements there. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to be able to get some better information on the criteria associated with selecting those parks and why a brand new park in Ward 7 was picked.
So I'm going to look to see Ms. Scher, Mr. Yeoman, whomever would like to take that one. We'll go to Mr. Yeoman, it looks like.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I appreciate the question. Criteria for a program like this is always quite challenging. We know that we have community interests and needs throughout the city that applies to both existing parks that we have, but also to new parks too. Council may be familiar with the development charges framework that we have for collecting money. It actually has a cap. We are a service in parks that has a certain amount that we can collect up to, which means that we can't fully avail of all the funding that's required to meet our standards that we have. So in certain cases, there aren't very many on this list. We have identified new parks that we have an existing project on where we can actually enhance it to the standard and also make sure that we're delivering within the time frame that's allotted.
Councillor Rahman?
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback. What I'll share is that a lot of residents feel like in the newer subdivisions where park amenities were added in the last 5 years or so, that they've been undersized and underscale. So I understand the desire here at Kent Park to open the park with new amenities, with enhanced amenities and enhanced playground equipment. Completely understand the desire to do that because of that complaint. However, for the last few years, we've seen requests from folks that are at or around Black Acres Park, that are around Vista Woods, that are in the area in Upper Richmond Village, that are in a situation where their parks are undersized for their neighborhood. Either they don't have enough amenities at those parks, so what do? They go to neighborhood decision-making and they put in a request for additional equipment. And they compete against each other for basic level equipment at their park, well, above basic, let's call it. And there are new subdivisions that are very dense and where there's a lot of young children. In fact, our master plan for Parks and Recreation says this is primarily the area where you're seeing a lot of 0 to 9 and 10 to 19-year-olds. And yet we've undersized the equipment and the amenities to these parks. So my hope when we were working on this and when the mayor put in the budget was that it would help to address some of these concerns. And I'm really hopeful that we can continue with some discussions to be able to look at opportunities to address some of these issues.
Thank you, Councillor Rahman. Councillor McAllister.
Thank you, and through the chair, appreciate the work that went into this. I know it's always difficult with the scale of parks we have, a number of recreational facilities. It's always tough to make these decisions, but I appreciate in terms of the variety of projects that was put forward. I also like in terms of spreading it out amongst the wards. I'm also wondering in terms of, I know we had allocated this money from Community Investment Reserve Fund, but with the provincial government's announcement in terms of the Community Sport and Recreation Infrastructure Fund, whether there's an opportunity for these projects, which I'm not sure in terms of how far along we are with them, but we do have the 2 years. This fund is for projects that need to be completed within the 2 years, but this money is available from the province. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to put in these applications, because I know that due date is rapidly approaching.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, and through the chair, that's a very good question. When we set up the proposed program guidelines for this, we looked at also what we can do in the existing multi-year budget cycles so that we're completed. And we also looked at the cost of the projects, and they ranged from $50,000 to $500,000. So currently, right now, we're working with our colleagues in facilities and Parks and Forestry to look at opportunities that would maximize the pots of funding available, both through the province in the two streams and also through GICB from the federal government. So we have a list of potential activities enhancements that really align nicely with those criteria and with the available funding that's been identified by the province. So we are taking advantage of those, and we are looking to submit well within the deadline of both of those streams for the province.
Councillor McAllister?
Okay, thank you, and through the chair, and appreciate that. If there are any, funds in terms of that we received from the province, just to Councillor Rahman's point, in terms of being able to redeploy those to either expand existing parks or, add some more projects to the list, I'm sure our residents will all appreciate that. I'm also wondering in terms of getting a bit more criteria as to how we chose it. Was it based on what we're seeing in terms of the growth of the sports, the amenities in the area, kind of doing a municipal scan to see which areas are lacking? So if staff could speak to that a bit more.
Thank you, and through the chair, just a point of clarification for this Neighborhood Parks Improvement Fund, or what we're looking to apply for the provincial government?
Councillor?
Yeah, and through the chair. Sorry, just for just on what we're at right now, just the neighborhood projects and
Okay, so.
and the
Ms.
multi-neighborhood projects.
Ms.
Thank you. And
Smith?
through the chair, what we did because of the timeline, we looked at, as we were directed to, where have we already gone out and engaged the community? So for example, through neighborhood decision-making, of the parks on this list, 16 out of 23 of them, those activities and amenities and enhanced amenities were identified through neighborhood decision-making. Others have been identified when we go out and we do previous park engagement and activities, and when we go out to ward meetings as requested. So neighborhood decision-making, previous park engagement, and we also get, as you are aware, as you often forward it to us, we get ongoing resident feedback and requests around what people would like to see in their parks and enhanced amenities in those parks.
And Ms. Scher, did you want to add something to that?
If I may, thank you. The other factor that was a consideration in selecting the projects that are listed here is their buildability. So do we require an environmental assessment, an archaeological assessment? Is the park able to support it? Can we acquire the materials in the existing supply chain methods that are there and the delays that we might experience? And can we deliver it with our existing staff resources? We didn't want the capital value of this program to necessarily end up being put into consulting dollars in this case. We wanted to make sure that it was going forward and out to the community as a physical new asset.
Councillor McAllister.
Thank you for those answers and through the chair. And this is kind of, I guess, the other side of Councillor Rahman's point. I know, obviously, the struggles with the new areas, but I'm also wondering in terms of the age of some of our older ones, looking at the more established parks, if that was taken into consideration. I know it's always difficult with these ones, but keeping in mind in terms of the volume of parks, but there are some smaller scale projects where we might have been able to do, as you said, quick fixes. We don't have to necessarily do a larger plan, get consultants, but was there an opportunity maybe to spread it out a bit more, or how did we determine which parks were the most deserving?
I will start with Mr. Yeoman, and then if Ms. Smith or Ms. Scher have anything to add, I'll certainly give them the opportunity to do that. Mr. Yeoman?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So we definitely did look at opportunities in existing parks where we know we have deficiencies, for example. We've got park areas that have evolved over time that have a different level of amenities, different amenity suite, which we're trying to standardize as we go along. We also have a lot of legacy parks that have infrastructure that was installed by developers at a time when the level of amenity that was provided is maybe not what we can replace today. So we're looking at opportunities through this as well to enhance so that the neighborhood's not seeing such a shock per se with what was there before versus what was going to be provided after the fact.
Councillor?
Thank you, and through the chair, appreciate all the answers. I do have a lot of questions on these ones. last question. I did notice in Appendix B that some of the larger capital projects were identified. I'm just wondering, were those just put on just to give us an awareness, or are there any plans through this to do any work on those sites?
Mr. Yeoman?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That was just to provide a bit of context in terms of what's going on in the various wards as well with the active projects that we have. During the 4-year period, we have 137 projects that we're completing that are parks infrastructure projects. We do have 5 staff that work very hard at this work as well too. So I thought that was important for everyone to know that beyond the Neighborhood Parks Improvement Fund, which is a wonderful addition to our parks infrastructure and our parks funding stream, we have a lot of other really important things we're delivering on for the community.
Councillor McAllister?
Thank you. I just want to once again appreciate all the work that goes into this. I know this is top of mind for a lot of residents, so I appreciate all the work that went into it, and I'm sure all of our residents are anxiously awaiting these additions, so thank you.
And I'll come back to Mayor Morgan.
Yes, just based on the comments from my colleagues, I appreciate the feedback, and maybe through you to our staff. I think that this is, I think what you're hearing from some colleagues is there's a lot going on. So we've got the new fund that we approved, that we've got existing capital projects that are coming forward. I think the map is helpful to show kind of the combined spread of those. But I also think based on all the criteria we have, based on the opportunities for provincial funding, you know, one of the great resources that I know I was when I was a ward councillor is having a really good on-the-ground feel for what are the real community pressure points where they're feeling like either something hasn't come along in their part of the city for a long time, or there's a need that is very specific to a changing population, whether it's through neighborhood renewal or a lot of young families moving into an area. And I think I certainly respect all the criteria that we need to follow to make sure that we can deliver projects on time and without spending a bunch of money on consultants or other pieces. But I think that there's also some feedback from ward councillors to say, hey, here's some small things that you should think about as you deploy this, deploy prevention money, deploy our Parks and Rec master plan that can help balance those, so that at the end of the day, the goal here is that the community feels like we're investing in their neighborhoods, right? And their neighborhoods are diverse, and they have diverse needs, and they have their parks are in different states. And we want people to feel like we're reaching out into all parts of the city in a meaningful way through the various parks plans we have. So I think you heard some feedback today, and I think that there's councillors can be a great resource for doing some checks and balances on what may have been community feedback at a point in the process, but more information may have come in through their community meetings and other things. So appreciate the work the staff's done, and I appreciate the comments of my colleagues to try to frame it around what they're hearing on the ground too.
Thank you, Mayor Morgan. Looking for any other speakers on 2.3 through 2.5. Councillor Rahman.
Thank you. I just had a comment on the 7th report from DIAC. My understanding is they had a presentation on the anti-hate project from the last DIAC meeting. I'm just wondering, bit of familiarity with the work that we're doing on that project. And the many stakeholders that are involved, community partners that are at the table for that, and very pleased to see the list of those involved. How does DIAC interact with the anti-hate project?
Ms. Dater-Spear.
Through you, thank you for the question. I would be asking some of our team members to give that specific answer, and I will certainly share that with council. I will be clear about they are members. There's a large group, a group that comes together from stakeholders from across the city who is involved in this project, and I will get more information to council to specifically answer that question. I don't want to mislead you by giving you the wrong information.
Councillor Rahman.
Thank you, and appreciate that. And just to follow up, very pleased to see the work that's coming forward from our community partners. It looks like a lot of them are coming to the table with their own individual parts of the project, and I'm very interested to see how that flows out to the rest of the city. And I love to see the fact that all these groups are working in collaboration.
Thank you, Councillor Rahman. I have no one else on the speakers list. If colleagues will just indulge just 2 very quick comments from the chair. I will say thank you to Mr. Yeoman and his team for facilitating the engagement that I was able to do with my residents on the Kiwanis Park project for Canada Day. I know between the Get Involved and the Canada Day feedback and the neighborhood mailout, we had several hundred people participate in providing us feedback. And I know that they're very excited to see both the pickleball and the basketball court come to fruition there. With respect to 2.4, the confirmation of the appointment to the Argyle BIA, this was the board's unanimous choice. Mr. Bergeron took over the home hardware franchise in East London about 8 months ago now. He's already been actively involved with the BIA and has actually hosted one event at his store and is hosting a second one, the fall yard sale coming up in October. So unanimous support of the board of directors at the Argyle BIA for his appointment to replace a member who has left us. So seeing no other speakers, I'm going to ask the clerk to open the vote on.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So moving on, we will now move to our items for direction. We have 3 items for direction before we move forward with the other items that were deferred from the consent agenda. Before we do that, though, I do want to acknowledge that Councillor Frank has joined the meeting. And welcome, Councillor Frank. We know you're traveling today. So I'm going to look for consent just by seeing if there's any objections to a change of order, knowing that Councillor Frank is traveling and may have at some point some connection challenges where she's joining us from. I wonder if colleagues would allow for the 4.3, the 12th report of the governance working group, which has Councillor Frank's attachment with respect to an additional FCM committee to be dealt with before we deal with the 2 reports from the Strategic Opportunities and Review Working Group. Does anybody object to dealing with 4.3 first? Seeing none. Councillor Frank, we're going to try our best to make sure that we get through your items before we lose you to a flight. So we are going to move to the 12th report of the Governance Working Group as our next item, and that is where your attachment with the Women's Committee of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is attached. So I'm going to first, we have 2 items here, so we need to receive the report from the Governance Working Group, make any changes that we may wish to change. I'm going to ask folks to refresh their eScribe and take a look at that. And once you have done that, I'm going to look for a mover and a seconder of the Governance Working Group report. Councillor McAllister and Councillor Hopkins. And then we will deal with the submission for FCM from Councillor Frank as a second vote. So looking for any discussion on the 12th report of the Governance Working Group first. Seeing none, then we will call the question motion 1. This is the vote on the 12th report of the Special Governance Working Group meeting. This is the terms of reference for the Council Resourcing Review Task Force. In here, there is also an it being noted that the committee received from Councillor Frank the communication. Once that's done, we'll look to Councillor Frank to actually put her motion on the floor for the endorsement for her to serve in that role. So seeing no further speakers, I will ask the clerk to open.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So Councillor Frank, I'm going to go to you now. to introduce your submission with respect to the FCM Women's Committee.
Thanks. I think there's been a little bit of confusion. So I'm not serving on any additional committee. I just included that as information to go along with the committee report. So there's no motion for me other than just sending this as information.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, and yes, and Councillor Rahman just indicated that you also have the trees submission. Since we've dealt with the 12th report of the governance working group, just in order to allow Councillor Frank to continue to be with us for her items, I'm going to look to see if there's any opposition to dealing with 5.1, the support for grant application for the Growing Canada's Community Canopies, before we move on to the items for direction from the Strategic Opportunities Review Working Group. Any objections to that change of order? I see none. So Councillor Frank, I'm going to come back to you now. We are going to deal with item 5.1 before we return to the items for direction. If you would now like to take the floor and introduce your motion, I will look to you to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Really appreciate the reorder as well. So yes, this is a bit of a time sensitive item, which is why it's been brought forward on the added agenda. Essentially, there is some funding from the Green Municipal Fund to do tree planting, specifically the Growing Canada's Community Canopies stream. And there's an opportunity for us to be able to work with the community, so including Upper Thames, Reforest London, London Environmental Network, who all have tree planting programs, to apply for a fairly sizable amount of money. Any municipality is able to apply up to 10 million over the course of this program. So they'll be running kind of annual intakes, and there's different streams. This is the first one, and Upper Thames, Reforest London, London Environmental Network are all eager to get started. So part of the grant application is simply a resolution from the local council saying that we support that this application is submitted to achieve tree canopy target. So it is a requirement essentially, and the application is due October 15th. That is actually when our next council meeting is, so not to put undue pressure on the clerks, but I didn't want to have that motion go to that meeting because I would need their resolution by the end of that night. So essentially that's what this is. I'm happy to speak to it a little bit more fulsomely, but I did have a call last week with all three groups, and they are working together on this application. As well, the city staff are also considering including some funding for municipal programming as well. And I know that Mr. Yeoman is here and he can probably answer any questions regarding that. So happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I would be happy to move the motion that's included in the letter at the bottom.
Thank you very much. And I know that you had a seconder in Councillor Rahman for that motion. So I'm just double checking, and Councillor Rahman's giving the thumbs up and nodding. So it has been moved by Councillor Frank and seconded by Councillor Rahman. Now I'll open the floor to colleagues for any discussion on this. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the councillor for her advocacy and the seconder as well in supporting trees in our city. Obviously, we do love our trees here. I also was pleased to see that these three groups have come together and working together, which is I think it is stronger in numbers and how different groups and organizations can support each other. I do have a question though regarding the motion, and it is looking for council support for the grant application. Would this support come from the mayor's office, or how is the support going to be given to these groups to support their application?
I will go to the clerk on that, Councillor Hopkins, but I think that the simple answer is if this motion passes, then it's a resolution of council. And I'll just ask the clerk to confirm that.
Thank you. Through the chair, that's correct. And I understand that it is due the day of the council meeting. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that's what I understand.
So my question would be, is that enough time, since the resolution will be done on the day of the timeline? Is that going to be sufficient? Because it will just be a resolution. Is that correct?
Well, we're going to go to the mover of the motion for that, Councillor Frank.
Thank you. Yes, so essentially, if it passes at this SPPC, it goes to next week's council, is my understanding, which is September 28th. That is why it is time sensitive. And that's why I didn't want it to go into October, because then the next council date is October 15th, which is the deadline of the grant. So sorry, I wasn't clear on that. Essentially, if we do pass it today and it goes to council, then it gives the groups another 2 weeks to work on the application and submit.
Thank you, Councillor Frank. Councillor Hopkins, getting the thumbs up. Any other speakers on this? Seeing none, then I'm going to ask the clerk to open the vote.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. And Councillor Frank, I know that you may have to leave us at some point to board a flight. If you can just send the clerk a quick note to let us know when you're leaving. Obviously, we hope you can stay with us for the whole meeting if we're really efficient and get through everything else. But if you are not able to, I know on behalf of council, safe travels, and we will see you when you return home. Colleagues, moving back to our agenda, we have 2 more items for direction. We have the second report of the Strategic Opportunities Review Working Group and the third report of the Strategic Opportunities Review Working Group. The second item, 4.2, has a request for delegation status attached to it. So I'm going to first look to deal with item 4.1, the second report, and I'm going to go to Budget Chair Pelosa to see if she's prepared to move that.
Yes.
And do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Pribble. So that's been moved and seconded, and now we can have any discussion on item 4.1, the second report of the Strategic Opportunities Review Working Group. Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to open the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-2.
Thank you, colleagues. That brings us to item 4.2, the third report of the Strategic Opportunities Review Working Group, and Part A, the added request for delegation status from Mr. McGigan. Again, I'll go to the committee chair. Councillor Pelosa, are you prepared to move the report and the request for delegation status?
I am, and then I would like to make comments on the report.
Okay, so we will, we've got a mover for both. Do we have a seconder for both? Councillor Pribble? Okay, so what I'm going to do first is ask the clerk to open a vote to receive, to approve the delegation. We will have that. I'll go to Councillor Pelosa then to make some comments on the report. Then we'll go to our delegate in the gallery, Mr. McGigan, for his presentation before we go to a final vote on things. So first we will open the vote for the delegation.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So, Mr. McGigan, we're going to go to some opening remarks from Councillor Pelosa on the report as a whole, and then we'll come to you for your presentation to us. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you. I'll be brief, just as the working group chair. Just highlighting for colleagues that item 2.1 on this is further direction that we did receive a staff report from the London Police Service Reserve Fund bylaw review, and that the deputy mayor and I would be requested to engage with the London Police Service Board regarding the report. We did not pick the mayor to go just because he's already on that board, and just making sure for ease of conversation that it wasn't involving a board member. The training for agency boards and commissions would receive funding through this. Municipal golf, there was a staff report, excellent conversation. We did have a member of the public join us for that. And just letting colleagues know, as previously said, that there will be no further Strategic Opportunities Review Working Group meetings this year, as we're rolling into the budget season, and anything that would come further would not be until 2025. And that's the overview of the report.
Thank you, Councillor Pelosa. So now we will go to our public delegation. So Mr. McGigan, if you'd like to come to the microphone, I will just ask you to state your name for the record for the clerks. We do have it on the agenda, but just so that it's there, and then you'll have 5 minutes. I know you circulated some information ahead of time, so we do have that as members of council. And we will, when you're ready, we will begin.
Andy McGuigan. Actually, excuse me, it's a little nervous. Haven't been in here before. Thank you, Chair. I do want to address your attention to
We're going to get you to hold on just a second. Can we just get the microphone a little bit closer to you there, sir, so that we can hear you? For us, you're cutting in and out. That sounds much better.
Okay.
So you go ahead. I'm just going to restart the time because we were just having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. I do want to address the chart that I provided, okay? But I'd like to have some open remarks, okay? You're probably never going to see another report similar like this from Parks and Recreation. And the reason for that is that I think they've abdicated their responsibility for municipal golf. And that is because they've actually changed the definition of municipal golf from urban golf to regional golf as well, okay? And in the process, they've lost control of municipal golf because you can't get a comprehensive review of municipal golf from the point of view of supply and demand from the regional golf. It's an independent association. It's not even an association. They're all independent courses, and there is no facts of supply and demand that anybody can put together, okay? So in my opinion, Parks and Recreation have abdicated their responsibility for manufacturing, for municipal golf, okay? Going back to the chart, we see that the population, of course, is increasing.
Can I get you to hold on just 1 second? Sorry to interrupt you. Councillor Truss, I was still having a bit of a hard time hearing. Can you speak
Sam.
right? Yeah, if you speak right into the microphone.
Okay.
That's much clearer. Go ahead.
The focus is on population growth, and as you can see from the chart, it goes from 519,000 to 650. The consequences of that is that the demand, municipal golfers' demand, okay, increases from 147,000 to 185. And in the process, with a limited 3.5 courses that we have in the network, sorry, Sam, okay, is that we are short of about, by 2050, we will be short 69,000 golfers in the municipal. That means that those people are either going to drop out of municipal golf or they're going to be forced to go to longer commutes, higher cost, and greater inconvenience by going to the regional. It's, excuse me. The opportunities that I'd like to address, given that in my belief is that the Parks and Recreation have abdicated their responsibility for municipal golf for London, okay, is that we should be looking at a not-for-profit organization to take over the responsibilities as an independent body for municipal golf with on-site certified practitioners, okay, CPGA certified, and an independent board of directors. We've seen it. We've talked to them, to San Antonio. San Antonio, Texas has adopted a not-for-profit. They've gone from a $500,000 deficit to having fully replaced or updated one of their courses fully, completely from T to Clubhouse. Okay, they've irrigated 2 others, and they've done that at no cost to the city whatsoever. Okay, it's a joint public and private board of directors with 6 appointees by the city and 6 elected privately. Okay. They've been doing it for 7 years now, and it's very successful. They've just had a 5-year extension on their contract, which was for 10 years. And I might submit to you that given the fact that Parks and Recreation have essentially abdicated their role in terms of parks, municipal golf, we need to look at some alternative, and the not-for-profit looks a very good option. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for staying inside your 5 minutes as well. We always appreciate that. It's always awkward to have to cut someone off. And sorry that we had to interrupt for the microphone so that we could hear you.
Thank you.
So colleagues, we are dealing with item 4.2. That's the 3rd report of the Strategic Opportunities Review Working Group. Still stumbling over that acronym, but we're going to look for any discussion on that. And I'm going to go to Councillor Hopkins to start.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank the resident for coming forward and requesting a delegation. I know it is difficult to do, but I really appreciate his engagement and his concerns around municipal golf. My question I have, though, with the report is regarding 2.1, which is the London Police Service Reserve Fund bylaw review. I'd like to maybe go through you to the chair. Just appreciated her update, but I'd like to know a little bit more about how the review is going to be shared with council, or if that is going to be even considered. I do appreciate the councillor and the deputy mayor being part of those discussions with the police board, but just wanted to have a better understanding how that report is going to come back to us.
Well, let's go to the chair of the working group, Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to, when that meeting does happen, provide a debriefing note like you would see from AMO when you come back, or FCM, of just the conversation happened. And if there's next steps that's come out of it, it would have been the first of its kind meeting, so I can't predict how it's going to go, but happy to report back through either SWORG or SPPC, the appropriate place where the clerk tells me to put it, to bring it as soon as that meeting happens.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you for that response, and I look forward to the debriefing on that. I do want to thank the clerks, too, for passing on the link for that working group. I really did appreciate it as well, so thanks to the clerks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I've got Councillor Trussow next, and then Mayor Morgan. Councillor Trussow.
Thank you. I'll pass.
Okay, we'll go to Mayor Morgan.
Yes, my question is on the service review training for agencies, boards, and commissions. Upon council approval, I can tell you I've had a number, because I'm engaging with boards and commissions in the development of the budget. I've had a number of boards and commissions ask, when this opportunity would be available. There's certainly interest in it. So I'm just curious on, I know this is SPPC, then it goes to council. Upon that, how quickly could that actually be rolled out and available to boards and commissions to take up on that opportunity that we're offering?
Ms. Barbon.
Thank you, through the chair. So we've, although we know it's not going to council until final approval till council, we have been in communications to try to line everything up with KPMG to be able to provide the training. We're hopeful that we have a couple of dates in November that we might be able to roll this out. So the intent is trying to do it fairly quickly before the year end, so that it'll give plenty of time for those to begin for next year. So we're trying to get everything lined up so that pending council approval, we'll be able to go out and get some dates ready to go that hopefully we'll be able to align with all the boards and commissions to attend.
Mayor Morgan.
Yes, thanks. And I'll take this opportunity on service review to, again, thank our staff for the continued work that they do on the city's service review program. I think we've learned quite a bit in the years of experience that we've had, and it'll be great to support the boards and commissions with that. If colleagues recall, in the multi-year budget, just in the first year, 2024, staff found $10 million of permanent savings. And have now carved over $50 million out of the base budget through service review completely, representing almost $250 million of savings over the entire span of the service review program. So it's taken some time to work through the different parts of the corporation, but it has long-term financial benefits for Londoners, and I think providing that assisted training to other boards and commissions to take advantage of would be quite beneficial, just like it has been here at the city.
Thank you, Mayor Morgan. I don't have anyone else on the speakers list. However, I am going to, should they wish, and they don't need to, but I'm going to go to Mr. McGonigal from our staff to see if he'd like to provide any feedback. I know our delegate did not stay for the outcome, but I did want to see if he wanted to provide any commentary for us on partnerships that the municipality is pursuing with golf, or other, given what we heard about the feeling that perhaps we're abdicating because we're looking at things from a regional view. I just wanted to know if you wanted to provide a response to that.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments, and thank you to the delegate for his comments as well. From a municipal golf perspective, I think what's important to know is there has been no municipalities that have built golf courses since the 1990s. As noted in the staff report, there's 3 overarching boom periods for golf courses to be built. As you know, we have a Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Our Parks and Recreation Master Plan indicates that there is no future provision target for public golf courses. So there is no future golf courses from a municipal perspective that are currently recommended. And I think overarching around partnerships, there is a section in the Parks and Rec Master Plan under the goal of recreation capacity that outlines a variety of partnership types that are always investigated for the recreation and sports sector from a local government lens. And so we're very comfortable with where golf is. Obviously, we, council, made a difficult decision in 2021 to try and right-size the system. And since that time, we have been putting record reserve fund profits away. We've been making record investments. We've also had record utilization of our golf courses. So we have a variety of contracts in place from golf carts to third-party resellers of tee times. We have partnerships with Special Olympics who use our fully accessible 9-hole course at Fanshawe. So there is a variety of partnership types, and we will continue to explore those. And I think moving forward, administration will continue to focus on improving playability, affordability of the game, and additional revenue generation opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGonigal. Just wanted to provide you that opportunity to just update us on a little bit about what we heard and what was in the report. So I'm going to look to colleagues for any last questions. Otherwise, I will ask the clerks to open the vote. And I see no other speakers in chambers or online, so I will ask the clerk to open the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So we've dealt with our items for direction. We've dealt with our deferred matter, which was on the agenda. We deferred 2 items from the consent agenda. 2.1, the mayoral direction on city-owned parking lot redevelopment, is the item that we will now move to deal with, deferred from the consent. And Councillor Stevenson, you asked for this to be pulled. So I'm going to go to you first before we do anything with this item.
Thank you. I pulled it because I am likely to be voting no, but I'm happy with the motion going forward. I'm not making any amendments.
Okay, so we'll look to see if there's a mover and a seconder. And Mayor Morgan, I assume you want to move your parking lots. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Ferreira. So that's been moved and seconded. So we'll look for any discussion. Mayor Morgan.
Yes, I just want to provide some context. Although it says mayoral direction, I just want to be clear on what that direction was. That was for staff without any sort of selection or identification of any possible specific parking lots from myself to look at municipal parking lots in the core of our city and across our city and say what might make sense to bring forward to council for their consideration. Not providing any sort of direction on which specific lots to bring forward, basically saying within your expert advice, which ones do you think we should take another look at? And then return to council, this body here, which is before us today, for any sort of discussion or feedback or adjustment or process the council would like to follow in looking at this. So although I did use a strong mayor direction, all that direction was to bring it before council for council decision-making, council debate. So I want colleagues to feel and know that everything from this report is on the floor for your consideration, for your discussion, for your adjustment, for your questions, for your change. It is a staff report based on a direction I gave, but that's where my influence ended, and it's put in the hands of council. So if you have concerns about any specific lots, if you have questions about why lots were not included in the initial 5, like this is the time to ask them, and this is the time to have that discussion before you proceed, because it will be a council decision at this point forward whether or not we proceed with any aspect of this, all of this, or part of it in a modified way. But I just want colleagues to know, because I know we don't do mayoral directions very often. I just want to be very clear that this was simply to have this come before you. The only thing that I ensured happened is that we would have this discussion, but it's my intent to fully respect the discussion and hear the feedback of colleagues, particularly those who might be impacted or think that there are impacts on their community about the proposed components of the staff report here. So I look forward to the debate and discussion and would encourage colleagues to do so before making any sort of decision.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Councillor Hopkins, we're going to let you jump in and lead off with that, and then we've got Councillor Ferreira next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the mayor for that clarification. And I really do think it's important that we look at opportunities. I can see that's where that direction was coming from, but ultimately it is up for us for consideration. So I do have a couple questions, and it mainly relates to most likely Horton Street, but more particular Rideout Street, which is Site 3 and Site 4. And my question, first of all, I've been on this council for a number of years, and I am the first one there with my hand up supporting the need to get away from parking lots in our downtown core. So in any opportunity, I'm more or less in favor of. With this direction, with the sites that have been mentioned for high-density housing and parking lots as well. The concern I have is more on Site 4, which is the Rideout Street, which is partially on a floodplain. But it's also, the two sites have concerns around the servicing for this for these two sites for sewers, but also the opportunity to develop it. I look at it as more of a brownfield development, but the challenges of Rideout Street in particular, when it comes to it being a very environmentally sensitive area. We did take it over from the PUC a number of years ago. It is our responsibility to mitigate the environmental effects that are in this area. And as we look at development opportunities, my concern is really more around how we as a city are going to be responsible for the care and the mitigation of Site 4. So maybe the question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff would be to give me a better understanding or us a better understanding if development was to proceed on this site. How would that look like, given that the direction is to go high density and a parking lot as well? So we're not really just we have specifics in these proposals going forward, but I'd just like to see how the future of the site would develop, given the constrictions.
Well, let's go to Mr. Mathers to start, and if other members of the team need to weigh in, certainly pass the mic as you see fit, Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, so the two sites that were flagged there, they're more complex sites. There is historical contamination on those sites. They are currently owned by the city, so whatever happens with those sites, that responsibility still does lie with the city in the long term. And with this approach would be an opportunity to look at a redevelopment of the site, and that would be very specific to what the folks that would be putting in submissions, what they would look for on this site, whether it's how large the development is, how intense it would be. So whenever we go out for a proposal, especially on a site that's as complex as this, we ensure that we do our due diligence, provide that information so that anyone who might be interested would be apprised to the complexities on this site. That also provides some opportunities too. So whenever you can reuse a brownfield site and allow for that remediation and have a long-term planning, then there's also a value and a benefit to that as well. So any work on this site will be a balance between ensuring that the complexity is understood by the applicant and that the development in its final state is appropriate for this location.
Councillor Hopkins.
And thank you for that. It's hard not to be concerned about any kind of development on a partial floodplain, along with the challenges of mitigating the property will exist. And my concern is really about how we as a city will be responsible for that development, if at all. And that would be obviously looked at through the process. But I just wanted to share those concerns a little bit. In the direction that is being given here, we are going to be looking at high-density housing and public parking. So for Site 4 in particular, would there be a proposal, can a proposal be made on this site just for structural parking only without the high density?
Mr. Mathers.
To the chairs, so just ensure I understand the question there. So this would be whether there be an opportunity to just provide structured parking and not high density. That opportunity does exist. We, of course, would ideally be able to have both of those types of things if we're looking at this level of investment in the area, but we would be open to receiving applications as part of the procurement process. Of course, we know that housing is very important and something that we need in our core as well, so we would be open to those type of opportunities. But the focus, and from my understanding of the mayoral direction as well, is that we are looking for housing as part of these developments.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you for that response. I'm very open to hearing what the rest of the committee has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. We will go now to Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So seeing this report, I did like seeing what I was seeing. It's the first real bulk move that we have in converting our surface level parking lots to something better. So I did appreciate that. We do have the work with 185 Queens that's touched on, and but that is its own separate proposal. So I did like seeing that, and I do like how this is touching into the downtown parking strategy that we had. So we are reutilizing some of the work that was already done. I guess Councilor Hopkins did kind of point on some of the points that I was going to point on for ride out for that location, but I guess I would go further to her questions and just ask about, the servicing capability specifically. I do see that we might not necessarily have any infrastructure there with respect to the sewer shed. And I was looking at that and I was just wondering, I guess this is going back to tying into, the main trunk sewer. Again, I was looking at the elevation and everything of that property. I do see that elevation is kind of around the same elevation as the main sewer trunk. So speaking with that and the flood line, what type of work would we need for that type of proposal, if we do see something that comes through that works with council, there's obviously going to have to be some infrastructure work there, but what would you foresee that needs to be done in regards to that?
Well, I know Mr. Mathers has some experience with that in his last posting with us, but I'm going to see if Ms. Scher wants to start for, no, she's waving off the call, so I'll go to Mr. Mathers to respond on that.
Through the chair, so very similar to any kind of development. So if it was another piece of property that someone was purchasing and wanted to bring forward, it really is for the applicant to determine what the needs are just to service it specifically. So sometimes that may require extension of services from different areas, and it really depends on also the density that they're looking at as well. What we've looked at just at a very high level is it doesn't seem like it's completely outside the realm of possibility as far as what the cost would be to extend servicing, but that would also have to be working very closely with the folks in our infrastructure and environment area to determine that the capacity is available. But we don't at this point think that that'll be a hindrance, but that'll be something that will come through this procurement process and be determined by the applicant.
Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you. Okay, I guess turning to 84 Horton as well. Actually, I would say I did remember that the report did touch on the possibility of keeping part of that parcel as surface level parking lot on the other side of the flood line too. So I guess we're exploring for that procurement process to see what comes through, and we're just kind of looking into the options. So I do, this is why I'm supporting it right now, because I do think that this is a good location. Looking at 84 Horton Street, I see that it did have a licensing agreement with London Hydro that ends in October 2024. Because we're trying to crystal ball some of the timelines, are we looking at like a short-term renewal for that parking? Or are we, well, I guess I'll start with, what is the current length of that contract as it is?
Mr. Mathers, do you have that information?
Through the chair, so we are working directly with the facilities group on this as well, and that's of course like a negotiation with the parties there. But the intention would be, if council decides to move forward with this, that we'd be looking at short-term renewals moving forward, so that we could both allow this process to proceed, and also allow for that parking to be maintained for at least the short term.
Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you. Okay, I guess I have one last question then, and it goes to Site 2 for 434 Elizabeth. I'm not a structural engineer or an engineer in any regard, but I was looking at the space and it does seem a little constrained because you do have residents on both sides or buildings on both sides. And I was wondering about Site 2 and what realistically we can put there. I did make note in the report that some of the common reasons parcels did not make the final list because it was too small or too narrow to accommodate any development, and that could lead to the potential of consolidating some adjacent properties. So the way I read that part of the report, and then when I was looking at Site 2, I was thinking that parcel was chosen because it's not anticipated that we would have to consolidate some properties around there. So I guess just further to that, with just the spacing itself, that site would be on its own and we wouldn't be looking at the possibility of acquiring some adjacent properties to help out with that. So just clarification on that.
Mr. Mathers.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll jump in here. Michael Thomas-Insick. Thank you for the question. It is definitely a challenging site because of the sawtooth pattern, but if and when it goes through a procurement process, it is possible for the private sector to acquire abutting lands as well if they think that they can make a go of that. But also, the term high density is a proportion of the size of the property. So it doesn't necessarily mean a high-rise building. It could be townhouses on a smaller site. That could still be considered high density. So on a site like this, I don't want to evoke pictures of high rises. It could also be something more modest and appropriate size for that property.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas-Insick. Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you for that. So just at this point, the intention is to see what we can develop on that kind of weird bordered property there, so, okay. That's good. I guess that would be it for that. I'm supportive of this as it is because again, we are always talking about converting our surface level parking lots and making a better utilization of the space. I really appreciate that we're looking at high density, more intensification with respect to housing. I like that we are also including the possibility of affordable housing and stacking on the roadmap to 3,000 portion. And I also appreciate the plug-in for the parking because downtown needs that. So at this moment, I'm going to be supportive of this and I like where this is going and I'm hopeful to have something come back when the time comes.
Thank you, Councillor Ferreira. I've got Councillor Frank next with us online. Sorry, Councillor, you're on mute. Can you unmute and start again?
Thank you so much. Classic. I was like, I got the camera, but not the sound. Yes, one question, 84 Horton. I have already heard some feedback from constituents regarding the proximity to Old South. And as many of you know, many of the Old South residents are very interested in getting an indoor pool somewhere within walking distance to Old South, as was committed to them when the Thames Park was decided to be, or the Thames Pool was decided to be closed. So I'm just wondering if we move forward with this process, would sites like 84 Horton, which I don't know if it has the capacity to have an indoor pool, but would that be essentially taken off of the available options for that location? Because I don't want to preclude if that was a great site for an indoor pool that's city owned. I would worry about taking away that option, I guess, moving forward. So I'm just wondering through you to staff if there's any comment on that.
Well, Mr. Mathers, or should I go to Ms. Smith, or are you going to
I'll start out. So just to provide maybe like a high level context on these types of sites. So it's highly likely for any of these sites to be feasible as far as the remediation that's required and for the amount of the needs for the area, that you would highly likely need to have something that was an intense form of development to make that like a viable project. I'll let other folks speak to it, but excavating in these areas is going to be costly and it's going to have significant amount of effort that goes into it. So as far as like, I'll let the other folks speak to as far as like the viability of that for like a typical recreation project, but I can tell you that it's very likely that to make some of these sites feasible, that there will need to be some intensity there to make the performance work for any kind of development.
And Ms. Smith, did you want to add to that?
Thank you, and through the chair, I believe in Q1 2025, we've been directed to come back, and one of those recommendations is we're looking at where's the feasibility of looking in the Old South or close by district and neighborhoods of Old South and downtown, looking at bringing back some possibilities about building an indoor pool. So that will come back to council early next year.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Councillor Frank?
I appreciate that info. And I guess one follow-up that perhaps maybe is a bit of a discussion between now and council. I'm just wondering if part of that feasibility then too would be looking at the ability to commingle. So if it was, I don't know if this is possible, but like a community center in the basement and then a high density apartment building on top. Again, I'm just hopeful that this wouldn't preclude that analysis as well, if that is perhaps the only viable site in the area. So maybe I won't ask that as a question because I haven't asked staff in advance, and I'll ask it between now and council because it might inform my decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frank. I've got myself and then Councillor Trussow on the speakers list next, so I'm going to ask Councillor Rahman to take the chair.
I have the chair. I'll go to Deputy Mayor Lewis first.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. So just a very quick question on this. I mean, I think it's great that we've got some opportunity to look for redevelopment of surface level parking lots. I certainly recognize from my time on planning that as private interests come forward to look to partner with us on this, they may bring some of their own pieces to the table, including perhaps some other land acquisitions next door to make it a more viable or a more simpler site to work with. I guess the one question I have to staff, I was slightly surprised to not see the municipal parking lot adjacent to Budweiser Gardens on the list. But I'm wondering if that perhaps is because that site might be more, feedback might have been that that site might be more appropriate for commercial development, you know, a hotel or something like that, and whether or not we would consider, and I think it's kind of in line with what Councillor Frank was saying, when the private sector comes forward, although the focus is on high-density residential housing, does that preclude, or would that simply add to a scoring of an RFP if a partner came forward and said, we want to do some mixed use and we're going to have some ground floor commercial and some podium parking, and you know, maybe there is a community facility designation on part of the property, while the focus is on housing, does that still allow for some mixed use considerations to come into this discussion when applicants apply?
Thank you. I'll go to staff.
Through the presiding officer, so to answer that second question there first, absolutely anything that they could do to be able to provide and bolster like the case for a possible the redevelopment, I think would be beneficial. If it's something that's both providing like a community benefit along with housing, I think that checks quite a few boxes, so that we're very much open to that. On that, the current Budweiser Garden parking, so we did work closely and reached out to the folks at Budweiser Gardens in the operating group to assess some of their requirements, their operating requirements on the site, and with this future expansion that is being imminently proposed, that very much reduced this amount of parking that was available, and they had some concerns about, at least in the short to moderate term, being able to provide their operational needs, especially with some of the events that they're looking to host in the future, if they were to lose that additional parking area at this time. So we just decided based on those needs that we were going to remove them from the procurement. Doesn't mean like possibly in the long term, but we want to do that hand in hand with Budweiser Garden Operating Group, so we ensure that that we can both have that venue and then hopefully in the future look at different development potential.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, and I promise by the time they get the sign changed, I'll get into the habit of referring to it as Canada Life Place. That's all my questions for now.
Thank you. I'll return the chair to you.
Thank you, and I've got Councillor Trussow and then Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Trussow?
I want to just throw something else out, which I think might be a reasonable use for some of these areas, right, not downtown, but close to downtown. And that is as a site for micro-housing, some type of installation where instead of selling it to the private sector for development, we do something a little less intense and maybe even temporary, where we develop the property so we could put up some, I'll just use the term micro units very, very loosely, which includes huts and other things. Is that something that is precluded under this proposal? Because it says successful respondents of a procurement process. Would it be possible, without making an amendment or changing this, that we could investigate keeping it ourselves for something like that?
So I don't know whether I should start with Mr. Dickens or Mr. Mathers on this, because I know Mr. Dickens' area has looked at opportunities for housing relief, but Mr. Mathers, you've been leading this particular piece, so I'm going to start with you, but if Mr. Dickens wants to comment as well, we'll give him that opportunity too.
Through the chair, so the analysis that we provided was very much focused on that high density development. So, and also focused on a procurement process. So to suggest that if it's committee and council's prerogative to look at something other than the high density or the moving forward with the procurement process and or retaining those lots, that doesn't necessarily align with what's being suggested in this resolution right now. So this is very much focused on looking at higher density developments and looking at possible ownership and sale of the lands.
And I'll just give Mr. Dickens an opportunity if he wants to add anything from his division's perspective.
Through you, Chair, no, there'd be nothing to add. Social and Health Development has worked alongside Planning and Economic Development, Mr. Mathers' team, with the writing of this report and the plan that's before you. So nothing to add.
Councillor Trussow.
Through the chair, so I take it then that the answer is that there is absolutely no possibility that this type of affordable housing, perhaps run by a nonprofit, could be used on some of these lots. Is that correct?
Ms. Smith, Mr. Dickens, Mr. Mathers, whomever wants to field that one. Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, so there's possibilities for the use of parking lots for that type of use. It's just what the resolution that's before you is, doesn't allow that to happen. It actually is going into a different direction. So if that is council's prerogative to look at that or explore opportunities or for any of these lots to provide that form of housing, we can take that back and explore the opportunity, but that doesn't align with what you have before you today in our report.
So thank you, through the chair. My final question then is, would it be contrary then to add a slight amendment along the lines of that can be considered as well, or would that be contrary?
Give us just a moment here. Okay, so let me share with you the discussion the clerk and I just had. If you wanted to alter this, it would not be contrary. You would have to add additional uses in Clause A. So where it says high-density housing and public parking, you would have to add additional uses into that clause for these 5 sites. However, I will say, on the advice of the clerk, perhaps the question we should direct to staff first is from a viability perspective in terms of issuing RFPs and sources of financing, whether or not it's viable that way. So I don't know if you would like staff to respond to that, Councillor, but perhaps if and again, I don't know whether this would be better directed to Mr. Mathers or Mr. Dickens or both, but from an RFP process perspective, and from a source of financing perspective, would it be viable to add alternate uses to consideration here? And if you need a moment to discuss amongst yourselves before you respond, by all means, feel free to take that.
Through the chair, so I think if committee can be as specific as possible as far as what they'll be looking for. So if you're looking for both submissions that could be for high density or for like a micro homes or something like that, that would be an opportunity to have that included in here, or if there's specific lots that you'd like to look at for that alternative use. The difficulty then becomes, then how do you assess an procurement if you're and creating that criteria? Because if one development provides 100 units and the other provides 15, those are very different things that you're providing as far as procurement, and it would be difficult to be able to judge 2 different submissions that have very varying ways that they're looking at providing and meeting the needs of the procurement. So whatever you can do to be as specific as possible. Ideally, it could be that for a couple of the different lots that we look at that type of a use. It's just very different types of uses that you're considering.
Thank you, Mr. Mathers. Councillor?
Thank you. That's helpful. And keeping in mind what the mayor said at the beginning, we're not really making any decisions on any of these lots. We're just going to be getting a report back later. I would like to, if I may, offer an amendment to Part A, where it says high-density housing, public parking, and micro-housing opportunities. That doesn't go into a lot of detail, but it doesn't preclude any of the lots being mandated for this discussion or coming off the list. I think it's very general.
So just before we get too far away from things here, Counselor, it's not that the mayor didn't say we were not making a decision today, because we would be directing staff, and this is to Mr. Mather's point, to undertake a procurement process. And so that is, the reports back later would be on the individual applications that have been received, not on the direction that we're providing today, which is to undertake an RFP process. So it is a little different than not making a decision today, because we in fact are. And so, and again, I don't want to stop us from doing committee work at committee, but I wonder if perhaps you want to have a discussion with staff between now and council to see if there's, as you heard Mr. Mather say, those are actually two very different procurement evaluation processes. So I'll come back to you and see what your obviously, should you wish to make an amendment, you're free to do that. But I want to see what your will is with this.
Yes, I can say now, my will would be not to try to make amendments at a council meeting, which is very constrained. If it's clear that passing this does not preclude having that discussion, that would be fine, but I'm just very worried that by saying this has to go into a commercial procurement process, we would be cutting off the possibility to use any of these properties for that type of purpose. And I'm still, a lot of people are saying they want to see these micro units. I'm still not sure where they're going to go. And this is land that the city already owns.
So I might be able to assist a little here, and I think Ms. Barbone might be able to assist a little here too. These 5 lots that have been identified today, any step forward would still be dependent on an application actually being made from the private sector. So there's no guarantee that we're going to necessarily receive interest in all 5 of these. But I'm going to go to Ms. Barbone for some assistance on this as well with respect to our procurement process.
Thank you through the chair. Happy to provide some clarity. So certainly with the direction for civic administration to undertake a procurement would mean that civic admin would take that under the direction of council to achieve the outcome that council is ultimately looking for. So based on the resolution, it is based on high density housing, and then we would set out through a public procurement process a request for proposals that would be looking for proposals that would achieve that objective. High-density housing, in terms of what it is we're looking for, may not be the same as a request for creating, something different that might be micro-houses, for example. So in order to evaluate the proposal and who ultimately would be successful, we need to have very clear criteria and very clear outcomes of what we're looking for the proposal to satisfy. So if the direction is to do something different, we would need that direction to take back so that they can prepare the proposals and do that public procurement process in accordance with council's wishes. When that procurement process is done, the proponent who would satisfy that and would achieve the best value would then be brought forward, whether they're done independently or together, brought forward for council's approval to award a contract at that time.
Councillor?
I think I'll let others take it from here.
Okay, we're going to go to Councillor Stevenson next.
Thank you. I do have quite a few questions on this, especially given that 3 of the 5 are in Old East Village, and it's actually 3 of the 4 municipal parking lots in the business district that is a business improvement area as designated by this council. I'm wondering, it says about that these 5 were chosen because of the critical the critical criteria, and I'm wondering what the critical criteria are that meant that some of these did not make the list.
Mr. Mathers or Mr. Tomazinskik, if one of you would like to respond to that.
Absolutely, through the chair. So we provide a list of criteria. There's over 10 different criteria, but for the most part, we're looking at things like whether the zoning bylaw that's currently in place, the zoning on the property, the place type, whether that aligns with the London plan, the proximity to railways, industrial facilities, whether there's servicing is available, the size of the dimensions of the site to see that if it's something that's large enough that could facilitate a higher density building, and also looking at the downtown parking strategy, any kind of actions related to that that are highlighted in the strategy, if there's occupied buildings or structures in and around it, and then also the cultural heritage aspects, any kind of potential for archaeological potential on the site as well. So we went through those criteria and then shortlisted a series of sites that have a higher potential to be able to move forward as high-density housing.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. So on that note, it talks about zoning, and in the first two, number 1 and number 2, that were ranked 1 and 2, if I see it right, the zoning is currently only 4 stories or higher. Is that correct?
Mr. Tomazinskik.
Is there a parking lot in particular? Because some of the zoning, for example, the ones in downtown offer a higher height. So forgive me if if you could provide a little bit more detail of which property.
Councillor.
Thank you. It's the ones ranked 1 and 2, so it's lots 1 and 2 in Old East Village, and they say zoning to 12 meters.
Oh, Mr. Tomazinskik.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's right. The 12 meters would provide a current height maximum of 4 stories.
Councillor.
Thank you. So when you say zoning is one of the key things that, allows us to choose these as acceptable ones, and we say that we need high density to make it, the pro formas work, do we believe that 4 stories is enough to make those work there?
Sorry, Mr.
Through
Mathers.
the chair, so for the purposes of this work, 4 stories may be a higher density than in this area that could be appropriate, but through the procurement process, the applicant may have other ideas of being able to intensify the site, and it would be through the planning committee, they would have the ability to either approve those kind of changes or not approve those changes. So we are open to considering things that are outside the zoning. However, that currently it just allows for the 4 stories.
Councillor.
So I guess that, like, my questions are, we say zoning is important, but it's only zoned to 4, the number 1 and 2 are only zoned to 4 stories currently. They're adjacent to heritage conservation districts. They're adjacent to the National Historic Site, and they are 3 of 4 municipal lots in a business district. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, why are these ranked 1 and 2? And was there any consideration to involve the Old East Village Business District in the planning, given that this list was available since May 27th? Just to ensure that we're not just looking at housing, but we're looking at what is our vision for this space, given that we have it designated as a business district, given that we've got the Hard Rock Hotel coming. I'm just curious.
Mr. Tomazinskik.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out too that at the appendix of this report, it actually provides the detailed evaluation criteria that we went through and why some sites are chosen and some weren't. So I just wanted to point that out. But none of the sites were precluded because of zoning. Zoning gave us a hint of what the intent of the development potential is on the site. But the reason these ones are ranked 1 and 2, it really has to do with their developability. So the size of the property, the suitability of the infrastructure, those are what made it 1 and 2. The further down you go on the list, the harder they are to develop. For example, we talked about the Horton and Rideout Street properties that don't have servicing right now. So they're lower on the list because they're not developable as easily as some of the ones on the upper part of the list. And then the ones that dropped off the list are just not developable at all in terms of the criteria. So that's the way they were chosen and ranked. So I hope that answers your question.
Counselor?
Yes, we just heard that it was really important that for the RFP, we have clear criteria and clear outcomes. Can that just be reemphasized here? What are the clear criteria and clear outcomes that council's approving here today?
Mr. Mathers?
Through the chair, so the clear outcome would be higher density housing and providing that, and then also meeting those needs for parking at the same time, the public parking aspects.
Counselor?
And given that we're being asked here to approve something that's going to an RFP process, what are the parking requirements for the 3 municipal lots in Old East Village?
Mr. Mathers?
Through the chair, so those would be determined as we move through the process. So say, for example, when we go through that first we need to see whether there's even any interest in developing any of these sites. So that's the first thing we need to hear. And then looking at those three locations, being able to determine like what are those parking needs. So we have parking data that provides information on how many of these spots are used on a day-to-day basis. We also want to ensure that there's a significant amount of additional parking there to be able to support the businesses if things do change over time, and that there's parking for those folks that would be living in this new housing as well. So there is definitely flexibility moving forward to be able to ensure that we have an appropriate amount of parking in this location, but we have a few good places to start from, which is one is how is it being used today, and then just ensuring that we have that buffer for the future as well.
Counselor?
Yeah, like still a million questions in that the downtown London parking utilization study was done in 2015 and it didn't include Old East Village. And we have a business improvement area that's been oversaturated with social services, that we have increased that oversaturation. It's undergone massive construction, and this report says that the parking will be right-sized to meet the needs. But are we looking with vision as to what the anticipated needs are? Has there been any consideration about making sure that we've got public parking near our bus rapid transit so that people can come park in the district and then ride the BRT? Has that something that's been considered?
Mr. Mathers? Or Ms. Scher?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We have looked at the availability of park and ride facilities as terminal facilities with respect to the rapid transit routes that are under construction and approved. We have not looked at the adjacency of public parking with respect to the routes at various points along those routes. The intent is that ideally people would get on earlier in their commute and be able to take the buses into their destination in the core of the city.
Counselor?
Thank you. But wouldn't the Old East Village Business District be, and the Western Fair Market there, would that not be like a terminal point that would be a great opportunity for park and ride?
Ms. Scher?
Through you, Mr. Chair, generally when you're providing a park and ride facility, the desire is to have people choose to leave their vehicle as early as possible in their journey so that you don't also have to widen those roads as they progress to the outer parts of the city to accommodate the additional private vehicle use. So you'd expect people to get onto these services that run to the periphery of the city as early as possible, close to their point of origin or destination. So if you're further out to the far east end of the city, we would hope that people would get on close to those destinations, and that if you happen to be within this area, you're able to walk to those spaces. That said, we do believe that there are opportunities to partner with some of the larger parking providers, whether that's Western Fair, Municipal, 100 Kellogg, some of the attractions to connect the OAV and the downtown as an entertainment precinct. But no, generally you would not provide a park and ride that close to your central hub.
Counselor Stevenson?
Thank you. Can you warn me when I have a minute to go?
I sure can. I will let you know right now you're at about 3 minutes and 15 seconds. So you've got about a minute 45.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to council's being asked to approve this to go forward to an RFP, and it said clear criteria and clear outcomes, and yet we're hearing high density housing and appropriate parking. Is there a way for us to get more specifics prior to approving the RFP process?
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, so we don't have further specifics for you right now. It's going to be very much dependent on the submissions that we get. If we have someone that is interested in one of the parking lots and not the other parking lot, then that will really determine what the needs are for the parking. If committee and council want to be overly cautious, you could say that you want to replace all the existing parking that's at the location. That is one way that we could write a procurement. We have done that in the past. So that would be another opportunity.
Councillor Stevenson.
Is there any plan to figure out what parking we want for that area, like anticipated parking? Is there any sort of larger vision there to think about doing that, to incorporate into this process?
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, so there was, as part of the multi-year budget submission, an opportunity to look at demands moving forward. We won't have that comprehensive look because that wasn't something that moved forward. However, what we do have is that we do have the data as far as who's using, how many people are using that site currently. We also know that there will be rapid transit availability to the site in the future, so that may also be one of those push and pulls as far as the needs for and demands for parking. So we would be looking within that those values to be able to provide some an update. Provide some limitations as far as what we would like to see as parking on the site. However, as I said, that if you want to be like overly cautious with this, then you could look at trying to replace all of the parking as part of any kind of submission that comes forward.
Councillor.
Okay, thank you. I did want to ask as well around on page 12. 2.4, it talks about supporting affordable housing, and it talks a lot about creating new affordable housing and supportive, qualified potential project partners to deliver on the supply of supportive, affordable, social, and community housing. And then in the next paragraph, it says it's not expected to participate in, but there's a lot in this report about it, and I'm wondering, is there an opportunity here for some kind of hub or highly supportive housing to come into this RFP?
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, the report speaks generally about that we have, of course, our roadmap to 3,000 affordable units and the different types of housing that's being provided. What we'll be looking at including in this RFP is if there's interest in pursuing affordable housing as part of any of these developments. At this point, there's no direction to look at a hub or other types of uses, but if there's an opportunity to be able to provide up to 10% affordable housing and use some of our other programs to be able to provide it, that's something that we'd be open to and something that would be beneficial. Anyone would be submitting an application as part of this, but it would be through that process, we need to determine how many units would be required, but ideally there could be an affordable housing component, but it would not be a supportive, it would just be the standard affordable housing.
And Councillor, I've got you at about 30 seconds left, but I also didn't stop the clock. Mr. Mathers had started his response before I realized I hadn't stopped my timer, so I'm going to be a little lenient on that, but you've got roughly 30 to 40 seconds left.
Okay, I have a couple of questions and then an amendment. So shall I do my question and then amendment after?
What I would suggest perhaps is ask your question, and then I did want to advise you that I have Councillor McAllister and Mayor Morgan on the speakers list as well. If you wanted to save a little bit of time to come back and move an amendment, you might, and again, completely up to you. As always, we're in council's hands as to when amendments want to be moved. Councillors can do that at any time. But as we haven't heard from Councillor McAllister yet, I'm just wondering if you might want to hear what others say before moving an amendment, but that's completely up to you.
Okay, I'm going to fire off 2 quick questions and then I'll pause. So in 3.0, it talks about the awarding of real property and then the subsequent sale. And I just wondered if that could be explained a little bit more. And then in 3.1, it talks about 32,000 as a contingency cost for fairness monitoring services. And I was just looking for more information on that.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Mr. Mathers, and then the clerk is reminding me that on an amendment should be moved the first time you're speaking. So then I'll come back to you to move your amendment and see if you've got a seconder for that before we go to the other speakers, just so that we're consistent with the application of our council policies and procedures bylaw. Mr. Mathers?
I'll go, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thomason.
Just with regard to the first question, 3.0 financial impacts, the intent of this paragraph is just to state that the city's contribution to the development will be the sale of the land. The city's not intended to get involved in the development process after that. There'll be no further contributions after that. And then with regard to the fairness advisor, this has been used sometimes in procurement processes related to property in the downtown or other areas where it could be contentious or it could be multiple different potential respondents coming in and trying to evaluate one very different proposal from another and making sure that each proposal is evaluated fairly. It's not that the intention isn't that we will use a fairness advisor for sure, it's just we want to leave the potential open in the event that it's necessary at that time.
Okay, so I will now come back to you, Councillor Stevenson, to move your amendment.
Okay, thank you. So given the answers to the questions and stuff, I would like to change A to say replace public parking at the following locations. So just add the word replace before public parking.
Okay, and we'll look to see if there's a seconder for that. Councillor Cuddy. Okay, so we are going to discuss the amendment now, which is to replace public parking. Councillor Stevenson, if you'd like to give your rationale for your amendment, now that's on the amendment.
Perfect, thank you. I would, given the answers from staff, I think it makes sense, given that this is a business district that we anticipate to grow and thrive and expand, and we've got the Hard Rock Hotel, we've also got the BRT, so people could come from that area, park, and then get on to the BRT. I would love to see it be a both and, so that we replace the public parking and we add housing to that. I think that would be pertinent for us to clarify in terms of clear outcomes for the RFP.
Okay, so we have a new speakers list now, but I did have Councillors McAllister, Morgan, and then Rahman on the speakers list for the main motion. So I'm going to go to each of you in turn. If you want to speak to the amendment, I'll go to you first. If not, then I'll just keep you on the list for the main motion, either as amended or if the amendment is not passed, back to the main motion for later. So Councillor McAllister, on the amendment, did you want to speak?
Thank you, but I also want to stay on the main list.
Sorry, just before you go, colleagues are asking. So the amendment is that Part A be amended to add the word replace in front of public parking. So the councillor's intent is that it would read parking lots for high-density housing and replace public parking at the following locations, which is with respect to her concern about not losing any parking spaces in the business district.
Sorry, a point of order to you, Mr. Chair, looking for clarification of, it's moved and seconded on the floor. Is the councillor's wording contrary to what's already on the floor? Because this would allow for public parking and they're not.
It is not contrary, and Mr. Mathers had indicated in an earlier response that council could in fact direct that all public parking spots be replaced in this process. But I will say it's been moved and seconded, and we've heard your rationale, councillor. I do wonder if, however, noting that not all of these 5 identified lots are within the OEV BIA district, and hearing your very specific concern to that, if you want this to be specific to and replace public parking within identified BIA districts or BIA boundaries?
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm not going to speak for 3 and 4, but for the others, I'm happy with saying replace public parking within the Old East Village Business District.
Okay, so we'll just give it just a moment for the clerks to get that language, so that's very clear. And thank you, Councillor Pelosi, for just getting that clarification, because it's not contrary, but to make that very specific is helpful. So we're just going to give the clerks a minute on that. Okay, so the clerks will work to get that into eScribe. Now, on the amendment that's been moved and seconded, and I'm just going to check, Councillor Cuddy, you're still okay to second that? Seeing a nod there. So first, Councillor McAllister, did you want to speak on the amendment?
Yes, I did, and also want to stay on the main list. And thank you, through the chair. So my only question with this, and kind of goes to my other questions I had, but how prescriptive are we looking for this? I understand the intention in terms of replace, but are we looking for a complete like 1-to-1 ratio in that every single spot that we're losing, we're going to replace with a parking garage? Or is this, like, I'm just trying to understand from staff what they would interpret that as in terms of a ratio.
Mr. Mathers?
Through the chair, so I would interpret this as a 1-to-1 replacement.
Councillor McAllister, you're good? Okay, moving back to the speakers list I had prior, noting that Councillor McAllister, you'll stay on that for the main motion. I had Mayor Morgan and then Councillor Rahman next. Mayor, on the amendment, did you want to speak?
Yes, and I'll stay on the main. So I don't mind supporting this type of amendment. I might make a suggestion and the councillor can think about it. If these lots are relatively unique and there's a bit of an unknown factor on the future or the potential for redevelopment, but there's an interest in a level of parking and pursuing housing, you know, there's nothing precluding council to say, on these 3, why don't we take a cycle, go consult with the BIA and the businesses, and say, you know, what do you think? Like, maybe there's areas where you feel there's a parking deficit, maybe there's areas where you feel there's a parking surplus, but it's not as prescriptive as perhaps in the amendment. There is a possibility here to just take a little bit of time on these 3, go find out some information, and then come back with something that might be a little more flexible in some areas and less rigid and prescriptive, because you heard how staff are going to interpret it directly. It may preclude an opportunity that the BIA and the community might be interested in by simply being too prescriptive. So I would say if the councillor has concerns about this, another option would be refer those pieces to the next cycle of SPPC on those 3 ones, take some time, get some information, and come back with something that might be a little more focused, that might meet the needs of the community a little better. The intent here for us is to try to open up opportunities. It's not to create, you know, unforeseen challenges for parts of the city. And so I think if we stay focused on that, then having a discussion about the opportunities where appropriate might actually get us all to a place where we don't miss an opportunity by being too prescriptive at this point in the process. I think that the other 2 lots on here, I know the ward councillors for those areas can speak for themselves, seem like there's consensus to move forward with. These RFPs need not be let all at the same time. There's nothing saying we have to do all of this at once. We can move forward with a couple. We can take some time on some. We can look at others that weren't on the list and say, we'd like you to do a little more work on this. Everything's on the table here, and council has the ability to make every decision. So I'm not against the amendment, but I would suggest perhaps we don't want to be as prescriptive, and maybe the council would like to just take a little bit more time with this on these ones.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Rahman, on the amendment, did you want to go?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to speak to the amendment and then to the main motion, please. So I'm trying to understand, we have parking standards. How does this now interact with our parking standards, which is a council-approved decision?
Mr. Mathers?
Through the chair, I'm thinking that you're, just want to make sure that I've got this right. So I think the council might be referring to the parking standards related to planning applications. So there would be a need to provide parking associated with any kind of housing development. What my understanding of what we're discussing here as well is whether this parking lot that provides some more of a regional parking for the area, whether that is the appropriate number, and we don't necessarily have standards specific to parking lots. That's what our demand work that we've done in the past would provide.
Yes, and I'll come back to Councillor Rahman, but the language that we have right now is specific to the public parking, which isn't the 0.5 ratio for development parking for housing, so they'd still follow those standards. But Councillor Rahman, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. Where I'm confused is we're talking about public parking, but we're talking about it in high-density residential, of which we have no minimums in certain areas, of which this overlays those areas. So, I mean, are we creating a loophole by allowing the public parking to stand on a council-approved decision on parking minimums in those types of developments, in those areas?
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, so those parking minimums or non-requirements, depending on the area, are for private parking, so what they need to be able to provide for their residents. The discussion here is around, I understand anyways, is around the public parking lot that already exists and whether there should be a limit or a reduction in the amount of public parking spaces. So the planning process, if the planning process did say that there was a requirement for additional parking to provide for those people that are buying the housing units, you may have to have more parking in this location than you have right now because you'd have the public component and then you'd also have the private component.
Councillor.
Thank you. So what this could look like is a development application could come back and it could say that the development has to meet X amount of numbers of residential parking, which the residential users could feel is substantially low, but it could then have public parking, which seems quite ample and underutilized potentially. And I mean, my own opinion, I see that as a challenging issue in this form. So I wouldn't be supportive of the amendment, only because I don't think it clarifies that. As well, the reason that these were identified is around the idea of highest and best use of property. And what the criteria were on highest and best use is using this for residential property versus using it for parking in underutilized parking lots. So if we're replacing all parking one-to-one, we're basically saying that those sites were not underutilized, which seems contrary to why we're creating this opportunity in the first place. So that's just my opinion, but.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Hopkins next, and then Ferreira, and then Stevenson. Councillor Hopkins.
And this is on the amendment, and I'm trying to be supportive of the councillor here, and I'm very concerned about going down the wrong road here to the intent of what is being proposed in the RFP process. So I'm very unclear what replacing means, and if there is a better understanding that you can provide the committee here in exactly what you would like to see in this area, I'm all for that. But right now, I'm very unclear on what replace means and how it relates to our policies and how we are changing those policies. And if we are, I do think it's important that we understand what those implications will look like if we are to support this amendment. That's what's going on through my head at the moment. When I'm confused, I'm not going to just go yes and just see what comes back. I think we do need to be clear going forward here. So those are just my comments on the amendment, and right now I will not be supporting it.
Okay, Counselor Stevenson, I saw you waving, and I'm going to take a little leeway here because I want to make sure that you were waving to respond to what your, because we've heard from staff that their interpretation of replace is a one-to-one. But we heard Counselor Hopkins say she's unsure about what you're meaning by replace, and I saw you gesture, so I am going to give you an opportunity to respond briefly to what your intention is with the word replace. But if you can keep it to that and not go into other parts of the debate, please.
Well, I am still allowed to speak to this amendment, though. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to answer, and I also have
I
some
just
things
have
to say.
other counselors on the list as well, so I want to make sure we give everybody a chance to speak. But if you can just speak to responding to Counselor Hopkins' question.
And then come back and talk more?
Yes.
Well, I agree, replace, but the original thing was appropriate. Council was endorsing appropriate parking. Like, that is not clear either, at all. And in terms of what Councillor Rahman said, there are many, many tenants in Old East Village who pay monthly parking in our lots. And so that's already happening. And I don't know that that would be an issue either, and it meets a demand there. So in terms of replace parking, well, I bring it up to ensure that we've got sufficient parking for what is council has committed to improving that area and expanding it and supporting it in thriving, despite the addition of more social services in that area and despite the problems with the proactive enforcement of the encampments right now. So if council is serious about having a thriving business district in that area, then I'm guessing at replace parking as an appropriate parking. I am looking to do what the mayor suggested and refer this back to get clarity around that.
Okay, so hearing that, and if that's why you were waving earlier, I apologize for not going direct to you. I do have Councillor Ferreira next on the list, but I just heard you say you want to now take your amendment and refer it per the mayor. So trying to make this meeting as efficient as possible and not prolong debate on something that we may be referring anyway, I'm going to come back to you just on the opportunity to refer your amendment piece, so those 3 lots. If we're going to do that, let's get that referral on the floor now.
I think it was a great suggestion, and I would love that opportunity.
Okay, so you would like to move a referral that Part A, 3, 4, and 5.
1, 2, and 5.
Sorry, 1, 2, and 5 be referred to Civic Administration with direction to
Consult with the Old East Village Business District and Community Association.
okay, and then report back to a future meeting. Okay, we're just going to give the clerks a moment to do that. I'm just going to see, Mayor Morgan, did you want to second that? I'm seeing a nod there, as you had sort of suggested the idea. Okay, I'm going to look for any debate on the referral now. It's been seconded. The mayor seconded. Councillor Ferreira.
Thanks, Chair. I had my hand up for the other one, but you can just keep me on the referral. I'll just make comments here. I think this is a good way to go. I can see that there's some more work that needs to be done for those 3 locations, as long as it doesn't impact the locations for downtown, for the Rideout and the Horton Street. And that would just be because the report did make mention of a parking deficit that we'll be potentially seeing in the future in that area. So as long as that is still going to be moved along, I would support the referral as it is at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Ferreira. Any other speakers on the referral? Councillor Stevenson?
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate this opportunity to discuss with that area. It is an area that is struggling. And And it is a beautiful area. We've got the National Historic Site of the Banting House. We've got heritage properties there. We've got Palace Theatre. We've got 2 residential towers that we have just recently approved, and there's another one coming. There is a lot to consider, and we talk about silos, and I really appreciate the opportunity to bring forward much-needed housing, but at the same time, take that soft eyes to what is it we envision in terms of transit, in terms of business district, in terms of heritage properties, all that kind of stuff. We also have a public safety crisis in that area. And so addressing this as well, I think will be good just to ensure that we're just taking a look and protecting a much valued district here. I think that an opportunity to find a both and with housing and parking will be great, and having the input of the community will be great. I look forward to being able to support this going forward with the input of the communities.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I'm just going to see if the clerks have the vote ready for us for eScribe. Give me just a moment, please. Okay, just a process question. Hopefully what's going to be a very simple and quick yes or no. Councillor Stevenson, we had an amendment and then we had a referral, but I'm hearing, because the amendment was specific to the parking, that the referral is actually to those 3 parking lots for the entirety of the main motion, so all of the pieces of it. So what procedurally would be best is if yourself and Councillor Cuddy are prepared to withdraw the amendment, and there's no objection from council to allow for that, because it's in the committee's hands now. And then the referral would come forward on the whole thing, which the clerks have ready, so we would just proceed. So first I'm going to see if anyone objects to the mover and seconder withdrawing the motion to amend that was on the floor first. And I'm not seeing any objections to that, so I'm going to rule that amendment has been withdrawn, and the referral is now on the floor with respect to the original main motion. So I'm going to look for any further debate on that before we call the vote. And this is just on the referral of those 3 specific parking lots, and then we would still have the main motion, the pieces that are left to deal with today. So no further speakers on the referral. I will ask the clerk to open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0, noting that Councillor Frank has left the meeting.
Thank you, clerk. Now, we are back to the main motion, which now does not include 1, 2, and 5, so that it would be Part A, 3 and 4, and Part B. And I know we had folks who had said, leave me on the speakers list for the main motion, but we've had a fair amount of debate now around the parking and the other components of this. So I'm going to go back very quickly. Councillor McAllister, you had been asking to stay on the main motion. Did you want to still speak, or are you satisfied? You want to still speak, so we'll go to you first.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, I think my questions are still relevant, because once we get the other ones back, I'll probably ask similar questions. So in terms of the affordability component, I know we identified the 10%. I'm just wondering, in terms of the staff report, if they could speak a bit more, how we reach the 10%. Do we think it's appropriate in terms of the bidding process that we're putting out? Because, I mean, right now, we're in a position where we don't really have a lot to compel outside of the fact that we own the land, and we're obviously putting this as a condition of the sale of the land. How confident are staff that we could get that 10%?
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, so it really come down to the pro forma that's developed by the applicant. So there's of course a lot of different ways to negotiate as far as the value of this land, the number of programs that we have. So we do have programs that would be available to be able to stack to make this a little bit more viable than other different initiatives may be. So it would really come down to the opportunity for the applicant to provide that in the pro forma. Usually how we proceed is to provide as part of the evaluation, to put that as an evaluating factor. So if there's still an opportunity to submit something that might be less than the 10% threshold, but you're going to be, the weighting and the amount of scoring that you would get be lower than you would if you were able to actually provide the 10%. So it would really be determined through that process, and there is at least more flexibility when you have a procurement that includes the land and then also the ability to stack with some other of the city financing.
Councillor?
Thank you, and through the chair. Yeah, and I mean, this is something that I'm going to keep in mind when we're evaluating these things, because this is an important condition, because we are the ones who own the land currently. And so when we get these applications back, I'm really going to be looking for that affordability component, because for me, it's a big deal. Like, we have our roadmap to 3,000, but in terms of, you know, us being the ones who have the land now and looking at as an evaluating factor, I really think we have to keep that in mind to try to hit our goals, right? So, and I appreciate what you said, Mr. Mathers. You know, there might be some that come in that don't hit the 10%. And I mean, I'm still open to hearing the different proposals, but I think if we get into a situation like that, I would like to see, you know, the other offers, to be honest, because if people are splitting hairs over doing 2 units, for instance, like that to me is just ridiculous. Like, I don't want to have it at such a low threshold that it's not really worth considering. And sorry, switching gears now, I'm also wondering, and Councilor Drosso raised an interesting point in terms of the micro-housing, but I was actually thinking of a different component of this. And is there anything precluding, as part of the RFP, looking at modular housing? Because I think this could be an interesting opportunity for us, because one of the things that I haven't seen to date is, for me, a big part of the housing crisis is, yes, we make these approvals, but the speed at which we get things built right now is a real problem. And I have yet to see any real appetite coming from the private sector for building modular. I think a lot of these, when we look at the high density, it's still the traditional building model, and that's fine. I know that's what they do, it's their bread and butter. But we do have modular housing going up in the province, and I'd like staff to respond in terms of, is that something they would be open to, or is that pretty much written off just in the way that it's currently written?
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, firstly, there's nothing limiting an applicant like providing that as part of what they want to provide. That's just the construction methodology, the way they're going to deliver it. They'd probably be more successful in being able to provide that housing quickly if it is a modular style housing. As part of our housing accelerator work, we're also internally within our building area looking at ways that we can streamline approvals for that type of housing, noting that it is something that is be a standard product that you'd be receiving. So there'll be opportunities moving forward, but there'd be no problem in including language like encouraging the use of modular housing as one of the things that we're considering, and I think that would really, for the most part, point to making that housing more affordable, but also that housing can come online more quickly if it was in a modular form.
Councillor?
Thank you, and through the chair, yeah, so I mean, I know we've just been through this exercise, but I do think that that's an important thing to add in, and I would like to add in the encouragement of modular housing for the RFPs. As Mr. Mather said, I think because we own the land currently, I would like to see some different models come forward, and I think modular is something we should absolutely consider. So if that language can be added in, I'd like to move that amendment.
So, Counselor, I'm going to suggest that you want, perhaps before you move that amendment, that staff need an opportunity to respond from a procurement process in terms of what that does to their evaluation criteria and how they would evaluate, as we heard with the micro-housing piece, it would be, it potentially, and I don't know how staff are going to respond, but it could potentially be a very different procurement evaluation and could in fact be contrary to what, I'm not suggesting it is, but I think we need staff to respond to that before we get into some language on, in amendment language. And I know colleagues have, again, I know this is a big report, and I know that we're always subject to amendments being brought on the floor, but I would really encourage colleagues to try and prepare amendments to motions ahead of time and circulate. We've now spent over an hour on this item, and we've actually made one vote on a referral. Mr. Mathers.
Yeah. Through the chair, there's absolutely the opportunity to include it as part, as I mentioned before. Any of this housing, the idea is that you're bringing it on quickly. It's not to provide a procurement to say that we want to move forward on a parking lot and that's going to take 10, 20 years. No, we want that to happen quickly. So encouraging the use of modular construction methods, that really, from my perspective, like links to the speed that you're able to bring something forward. So as far as, and that will be part of our weighting of our criteria, and modular would be something that would be able to provide that more quickly. So if it's language like that, we encourage, as part of the RFP, encouraging the use of modular construction techniques, then that would align with what you have before you today.
So based on what you just said, and to perhaps help the councillor with the language here, Mr. Mathers, an amendment that changed the language in A to say lots for city-owned parking lots for high-density housing, comma, encouraging modular builds, comma, and public parking at the following locations. Would that, from a civic administration point of view, encapsulate what the councillor is indicating his intent is?
Yeah, I'd tweak the language to modular construction techniques.
Okay, the clerks are making note of that. Councillor McAllister, I'll come back to you now. Because you're still the councillor, so it's still your will to put forward what you want, but I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that language, and I can speak to it now, if you allow.
First, we need to see if there's a seconder, and we've got seconders in Councillor Trussow and Councillor Rahman, so we'll go with Councillor Trussow this time. And now if you'd like to speak to it.
Thank you, and through the chair. Yeah, as the, and I appreciate what you said in terms of having these amendments through the course of the discussion. This is something that I've been toying with for a while, but I think this is a golden opportunity considering we own the land. Personally, I think this is actually, it adds to the competitiveness of it. Like for me, an element, like I said before, is the speed at which we can get these projects completed. So for me, looking at projects and the RFPs that come forward, I absolutely think, for me, this is something that really, is a determining factor, is how quickly these projects can go up. I've seen some very impressive modular constructions. I think this is something that other municipalities are looking at, and I think in this case and in the case of the others even, we definitely should take this opportunity to look at it through this process.
Thank you, Councillor. So on the amendment only, again, recognizing we are down to 2 locations, not 5. We'll look for any other speakers to the amendment before we move forward. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, given the concerns I had or have still on these two properties. I really want to thank the councillor for bringing this opportunity forward to maybe look at a different form of housing on these properties. A question for you, Mr. Chair, just listening to the debate. These two proposals will come back to council for a final approval, and we'll just receive those two proposals before they go through a planning application process. I just want to understand how we move forward. And this is going to staff.
Yep, Mr. Mathers.
Sure. Through the chair, yes. Similar to our other procurements, we would bring that back for council approval.
Councillor Hopkins.
And then it would go through the planning process, given that one of these properties is on a floodplain and there's some mitigation and there's some other challenges that will still go through a planning process.
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, absolutely. Any of these applications would need to go through a formal planning process.
Happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Ferreira, and then Mayor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I'm looking at this motion for the modular housing. I just wanted to get some clarification. You know, we are looking for high-density housing, so can modular housing be a component of high-density housing in this respect?
Mr. Mathers or Mr. Tomazinski?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. There is different techniques and also full modular builds that they can do for higher intensity buildings, so that it is an opportunity, yes.
Councillor?
Okay, I guess I'll stop my questions there. I just need a little bit more time to process this.
Mayor Morgan.
Yes, through the chair, I just want to ask a couple of questions of our staff. So I'm not opposed to encouraging modular housing construction. I am cautious about being overly restrictive if that precludes us getting something done that is with relative speed that achieves all of the other goals. So how would that play out in an RFP process? Would it be you get points for this, but if no one actually comes forward with modular housing, someone could still be a successful bidder because it's not viable there? I want to understand that how actually restrictive it is and how much there's still an opportunity. If that just doesn't work with the pro forma, that something can still be pitched that is viable and meets the other goals in the RFP.
Mr. Mathers.
Through the chair, so in drafting the RFP, we'd be highlighting a number of different factors, and many of the things that are listed here. One item would be encouraging modular construction techniques. The way that would play out in the ranking is that would be, it really is a result, and the resultant metric that you'd be evaluating on is the ability to bring forward that housing in a short amount of time. So if you can do that with a non-modular, then you may be really successful, or if you're comparing against someone that can provide the same number of units, the same amount of affordable housing, then you may be a little bit more successful if you've got the modular housing. But it's not to limit and to say that you're forced to use it, but it allows, firstly, for the folks that are submitting to know that that's something that is important, but does not preclude other forms of development as well. So it provides both, but when in the ranking, it would be as far as the ability to bring that housing forward quickly.
Mayor Morgan.
That's actually thorough enough to answer my second question too, so I'm fine.
On the amendment only, any further speakers before I call the vote? Councillor Ferreira, you only used 21 seconds, so you got some time.
Thanks, Chair. Just some comments. So I wish that I did have a little bit more time to weigh out everything. With modular housing, I'm looking at just some descriptions here on the internet. It does seem that it wouldn't be as high in density or intensification as the original work was intending. So, but I just wanted to clarify just a little bit more. I'm not opposed to the modular housing idea. I just don't want to lose direction for that high intensity intensification on the infill component in that area. So my question, I guess, directly would be, even though it is considered high density, will it be comparable to the original recommendation that we saw in the report with respect to how many units we would get?
Mr. Mathers?
Through the chair. So as part of that evaluation as well, one of the primary weighting factors and values we'll be determining is how many units are provided. So whatever is being provided, you're going to be definitely see more of an alignment between the successful applicant and the number of units. So if someone wants to use a very traditional modular approach and have a 3 or 4 story building on a site, and someone else wants to have a 30-story building, well, it may be less likely that the modular housing is going to win, but there might be other techniques that they're using to build a larger building that provides modular nature and can be done very quickly as well. So this wouldn't limit a more intense use. It just allows firstly for us to share that our interest in being able to make sure this moves forward quickly, and that we're interested in unique and innovative techniques if that's available.
Thank you, Mr. Mathers. And just before I go back to you, Councilor Ferreira, I just want to underscore the motion says encourage modular construction techniques, not modular housing, which really are two different things. And I would point out that our baseline road under the Rapid Housing Initiative used a modular construction technique to get it done in approximately a year, I believe. So there is a difference between modular housing, which is a form of housing, and a modular construction technique. So I just want to underscore that. I know we've been using the terms kind of interchangeably today, but just because that's what's in the amendment, I just want to be very clear that everyone is understanding what the amendment says with the construction techniques. And with that, I'll go back to Councilor Ferreira.
Thanks, Chair. I guess you made it a little more complicated now. This is a tough one, so I guess I don't have any questions at this time. I do look to committee for more discussion to help me with this one.
Thank you, Councillor. So I do not have any other speakers on the list. So I am going to ask the clerk to open the vote on the amendment.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So now we are back on the main motion as amended. I have 4 different speakers lists going here. I got to make sure I'm looking at the right one. Okay, so following the amendment, we're back to the speakers list on the main motion. Now it's the main motion as amended. Councilor Rahman, I had you next, so it is your turn if you wish to go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for keeping track of that. I just had one question regarding the costs for the basic site investigation. Are these costs realized before we have interest or not?
Mr. Tomazinski.
Mr. Chair, that's right. They are realized before so that we can give proponents an idea of what the property entails, what kind of contamination could be there, what the property dimensions are, and if there's any easements, for example, on these properties.
Councillor?
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you. And moving down back the original speakers list, I had Councillor Hopkins next. Councillor Hopkins, if you'd still like to speak to the main motion as amended.
I already spoke, thank you.
Thank you very much. And then the last speaker I had on the, sorry, I had 2. I had Councillor Ferreira on the main motion as amended. I'm seeing you waving me off there. And then I had Mayor Morgan.
Yeah, withdrawn.
Okay, that exhausts the speakers list. Councillor Stevenson?
Yeah, just a quick question. Do we want to adjust the financial expenditure estimate prorated 2 to 5, or is it better just to leave it?
I'm going to suggest that it should be left for now because we've referred a portion back. And so when that returns, staff may have a new number to put in there, but right now they would not have. All right, I'm going to ask the clerk to open the vote now on amended.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. That brings us to item 2.2 that was deferred from our consent agenda. That is the Municipal Accommodation Tax Tourism London Annual Report. I know that Ms. Finn has been waiting very patiently in the back for us. She was here to answer any questions during consent, but we delayed that a little bit. Hope you've been able to make good use of your time while you're waiting for us, Ms. Finn. And Councillor Pelosa and I had also circulated an amendment to this. So I'm going to turn to Councillor Pelosa to see if she'd like to move the amendments that I will second. Then once that's on the floor, we can go to Ms. Finn for any questions and debate on the motion. Councillor Pelosa.
Okay, I'm happy to move it. The clerks already have it in e-scribe. It was circulated first thing to colleagues this morning. The seconder is Deputy Mayor Lewis. Once that's official, I'd like to speak to it.
Okay, that is official. They have it in the system, and you and I are listed as the mover and the seconder. So if you'd like to go to that now.
Thank you. I'll be as succinct as possible. As colleagues know, in 2018, we brought in the municipal accommodation tax. This is a tax on hotel stays. The overnight accommodation is not on your property tax, and it does not come out of the hotel's profit that they're charging. It's a tax on top of that. I want to thank city staff. They've met with me and the Municipal Accommodation Tax Adjudication Committee, that's part of Tourism London, in April as we worked through questions and processes, as this would be the first increase we've seen here in London, realizing other cities have already raised theirs, and some are already above ours. We have circulated letters of support in advance of this to colleagues from the airport, the Grand Theatre, and what's currently still Budweiser Gardens. Looking for your support on this as it brings in funds from tourists, visitors to our city to help enhance the offerings that they get to involve and be in and enjoy better services. And then Londoners get also the benefit of money coming from out of town to enhance their experience. I'll also note that the Tourism Board does contain hoteliers on it as well, and 2 of them do serve on the Municipal Accommodation Adjudication Committee.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a motion moved and seconded. This would be receiving the report and then adding those 2 new directions to have Civic Administration undertake the process to increase the municipal accommodation tax, and that Civic Administration be further directed in consultation with Tourism London to report back to the appropriate standing committee or committees with the recommendations to council for any updates to the TIRF allocation policy and any strategic facility investments that might be identified. We do have Ms. Finn here who can answer questions to the report that was originally on the agenda, and then any debate that we wish to have on the directions as well. So I'm going to look to see first if we have any questions for Ms. Finn specifically before we wade into any debate we might have. So I'll look to see if colleagues have any questions. Councillor McAllister.
Thank you, through the chair. Councillor Pelosa actually alluded to one of my questions, which was you mentioned you had 2 hoteliers on your board. I'm just wondering in terms of feedback from the hotels, if Tourism London's received any and what that looked like.
I can go to Councillor Pelosa or Ms. Finn on that, but I think I'm going to go to Councillor Pelosa first, as the MAT is our direction, not a direction from the Tourism Board. We've had discussions with the board, but the board did not provide this direction. The budget chair and I did. Councillor Pelosa?
Yeah, thank you. Also, as you know, Deputy Mayor Lewis and myself are the council representatives on tourism, so balancing what hat we wear in what spaces. This was our direction to raise it 1%. Have met with city staff, Mr. Murray, about how to do this through the process. Some questions did come back. Ms. Finn can speak to it if she wishes, of some hoteliers still not completely understanding the process. It seems that it's not coming out of their profits, it's collected, though it's a separate line item. Though, as you would see, some of the ones definitely enjoy what the money gets people here for as we do enhancements in heads and beds, which generate more revenue. Have already spoken to Ms. Barbone and Mr. Murray about potential questions some hoteliers might have of policy that they could do some engagement with them. And I'll also note that the tourism board we rotate through members on a rotating basis, and we have a new hotelier coming on too.
I think, sorry, and I'm going to take a little prerogative to interject here. I think it's also important to note that Airbnbs are also subject to this municipal accommodation tax. It's not just the hotels. Any overnight short-term accommodations are subject to the levy of the municipal accommodation tax. I'm going to go to Ms. Finn to see if she's got anything she'd like to add to that response.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I couldn't have put it any better than Councillor Pelosa. She's very well aware, both of you, of the work that we do on the board. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Finn. Councillor McAllister?
Okay, thank you, and through the chair. So I'm also just wondering then, in terms of the increase to the 1%, obviously with Tourism London promoting tourism, what that added 1%, what that could potentially be used for, if they have any plans, just getting better line of sight in terms of what we anticipate that money being used for.
Thank you, Councillor McAllister, and I'll go to Ms. Finn. In this case, this would be specific to Tourism London's portion of the MAT. Obviously, 50% goes into the city's Tourism Infrastructure Reserve Fund as well, which is subject to council's direction, but Tourism London has full control over their portion of the MAT. So Ms. Finn, the kind of things that we might use increased funding for?
Certainly through you, Mr. Chair. Some of the examples are within the report, and we would continue to build on some of our marketing initiatives. Certainly with the UNESCO City of Music designation, that has opened us up to more of an international scope where we couldn't have afforded to have integrated prior to the implementation of the MAT. So our ability to build, attract, and host at an international level is certainly one of the initiatives we will be concentrating on. Certainly bid fees since COVID, everyone is trying to recuperate lost costs due to the pandemic. Bid fees are one of those areas that have increased. So our ability to attract and retain and host large provincial, national, and international events has become more expensive as well.
Councillor?
No, thank you for those answers.
Thank you. I'm going to look to see if there's any other speakers, and I've got Councillor Pribble next.
Thank you, and through the chair to the staff. I just have a question. The report that's in front of us and the 50% that we are talking about, the marketing funds for Tourism London, can you just verify for me that currently we have there $4.8 million balance, so we have $4.8 million to spend on marketing funds?
Ms. Finn, with regard to the balance on the fund?
Through the chair, this is the audited balance as of the end of 2023. As the tax continues to accumulate according to visitation fees, that's obviously going to increase or decrease depending on the time of spends versus the time of collection.
And Ms. Finn, I'm just going to ask if you want to expand as well. The councillor said that this is available for marketing fees, but you've already referenced conference and convention bid fees and stuff, so it's not solely for marketing. Did you want to provide some other contextual information about the types of things that the MAT is spent on? Because I know it's not just marketing.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly we provide additional support to new and growing local initiatives, festivals, events, event rights holders and the work that they're doing. Marketing is one small portion of it. We also use it for bid fees, and we also use it to assist in new event development.
Councillor Pribble?
Thank you, and I do have follow-up. In terms of this increase, has it been consulted, and are the Hotel Association, local Ontario Restaurant Hotel Motel Association, the hoteliers, have they been consulted, and are they aware of this coming today, an increase of 1%?
So Counselor, I'm not going to go back to Ms. Finn for that. Counselor Pelosa has already answered that. There has been discussions happening since April. Counselor Pribble?
Okay, I'll ask specifically. Do the hoteliers, local hoteliers, do they know that this 1% increase has been, because I'm going to say it the other way. Sorry, I'll start again. I do appreciate everything that was put forward, and it does make, when we do the comparison with other cities, it certainly, I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense. My issue is that the proposal is to start January 2026, and we are making the decision today. The hoteliers, I don't believe the hoteliers were consulted in terms of the depth that it is coming today. They would love to provide their feedback. They would like to be consulted. And I think that based on last 6 years, they've been great in collecting these funds for us. I do believe that we should give them this opportunity. I don't plan to support the B and C if it's defeated. It's not that I don't want to go move forward, and I do want to, again, compare to the other municipalities. But the thing is, hoteliers as the tax collectors, money collectors for us, I would like to have them the opportunity to give their feedback and consult. If we do that, I don't see any reason why it should be delayed more than January 2026. And I think we still have time to implement it. But I do believe that they should have the opportunity to give their feedback, suggestions, recommendation. And again, I don't even think, and just so you know, the hoteliers, even till now, 6 years, even though this 50-50 has been, they would like to have, they would like to receive the summary of what has been happening, not just from the reports. A lot of them, they don't see our reports, and they would like to have their input and their feedback. Thank you.
So I'm actually going to ask Councillor Rahman to take the chair. Because as someone involved from the board perspective, Councillor, I want to be able to respond to that. I don't think it's fair to ask Ms. Finn to respond to a direction that Councillor Pelosa and I are providing. But I would also, through you as I turn over the chair, ask if we could also get a response from Ms. Barbone about the process to increase this and the timelines that staff need, given that we are moving into our own municipal budget update season, and then they have assessment growth and the process that's involved in getting this increase, which also needs to have a provincial approval component because the province gives us permission to collect this tax. So I'm going to turn over the chair to Councillor Rahman and ask if she can go to Ms. Barbone and then to myself.
Okay, thank you. I have the chair. I'll go to Ms. Barbone.
Thank you, through the chair. So with respect to the process, the legislation sets out that a municipality may put forward the municipal accommodation tax. That is affected through the issuance of or approval of a bylaw that is brought forward. And then the implementation component is so the hotels collect the tax on behalf of the City of London and then remit the tax to us. So the money goes to them because that's at the time of they're collecting the fees for the accommodation, and then the tax is remitted to us. So no different than HST or other things. Instead of going to the provincial government, it comes through to the municipality. So with respect to implementation, certainly we know that if we were to really fast track it, it'd be about 3 months to implement. So 2026 gives us plenty of time to be able to bring forward the bylaw, the additional analysis to have that in front of council to approve the bylaw. And the bylaw, when we bring that forward and have that approved, would set out the implementation date. And then essentially from the collection perspective, instead of collecting the the 3 or the 4% currently, it would then be collected at 5%. But the same process would apply. And of course, that would also apply to our short-term accommodations as well, given the bylaw was expanded to include that. So I think that answers fully your question, but let me know if I missed anything.
Thank you. I'm seeing nods. Okay, so in response to Councillor Pribble, Deputy Mayor Lewis wanted to provide a response, so I'll go to Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm going to just ask you to continue, not to return the chair to me right away. Yes, so as Councillor Pelosa indicated, this conversation started at the April Tourism London Board meeting. Councillor Pribble, you were with me at AMO when we talked to Tourism Industry Association of Ontario as well. And we even at that point had informed them that there was the consideration to increase the MAT. They in fact provided information back to Councillor Pelosa and I with respect to, frankly, how far behind we are other comparable municipalities who have already done this or will have it in place for January of 2025. That includes Windsor, who will be going from 4 to 5 this year, Hamilton, who will be going from 4 to 5 at January 2025, Ottawa, who's already gone to 5 from 4 and is now seeking to go to 6, Toronto and Mississauga, which went right from 4 to 6. Large urban municipalities across the province are raising their municipal accommodation tax. No, there is not unanimity between the hoteliers. Just as there was not unanimity, if colleagues will recall back, I think only Mayor Morgan and Councillor Hopkins may have been present at the time, but something like a year-long consultation on food trucks and how close they could be to a brick and mortar restaurant and getting down to arguing about meters of distance. And some restaurateurs agreed and other restaurateurs did not. However, without naming and shaming, there are a couple of hoteliers who don't like it and who continue to insist that we're taking from their profits, which is not true. It is a tax collected on the bill as a separate line item, as was indicated. There are other hoteliers who absolutely recognize the value of this and who are supportive of it because we have continued to use both the Tourism London piece of the MAT to enhance events, to bring new events to the city, to do marketing abroad, to do those kind of things. But colleagues will recall that we've also used this municipal accommodation tax on our side, the Tourism Infrastructure Reserve Fund, to invest in some key tourism assets in our community, not the least of which was the incredible renovation that is underway at Bud Gardens / Canada Life Place, as well as just as recently as a month ago, drawing on that fund to support the Grand Theatre to replace their boiler. And those made sense because those are putting heads in beds. And without the ability to raise more funds to put into that infrastructure reserve fund, it does limit our ability to make major investments. I remember this particular council debating whether or not we should make the Bud Gardens investment because there was worries about the balance in the TIRF. So quite honestly, this is to me, a political decision on a tax. It is not an industry decision because people are not going to fail to stay in a hotel in London as they did at, I think, 100% capacity this weekend with Western Fair and Airshow London going on because we're charging 5% instead of 4%. They're not going to choose to stay in Kitchener and drive to London for the air show. They're going to stay here anyway. We're not in competition for hotel spaces that way. And whilst there may be a couple of hoteliers who still make that false argument, frankly, I do not think we should hold back on making this decision because they don't want to compete somehow with Toronto or Windsor, when in reality, they will not be competing with those centers. Those centers will do their thing around their events, and we will do our thing around our events.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor Lewis. That was in response to Councillor Pribble, so I'm going to go back to Councillor Pribble and see if he has anything that he'd like to add. And I don't have the time recorded as to how much time you have left, so I'll just check with the Deputy Mayor to make sure we keep everybody on time.
The clerk has been very helpful in recording this, so Councillor Pribble has used 2.5 of his 5 minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Pribble, go ahead.
Thank you. And I don't think that what we just heard from Deputy Mayor and the chair of this committee, that there will be any disagreement with what he stated. I think that, again, it has to do with the sector, that they feel that they weren't aware of this, that this is coming today. They wanted to be consulted. We have nothing to lose. As we heard, within 3-4 months, it can be in place. And do you know what? I would actually change. I said first that I would not support it. What I would like to actually do is I would like to refer it to the next meeting. And I would like to have our civic administration during this month consult with Tourism London and the accommodation sector with respect to proposing an increase to the municipal accommodation tax. We have nothing to lose. All I want is the sector that's collecting the money for us to have the opportunity to give their feedback and their comments.
Okay, sorry. So I heard you ask for a referral. So you're moving a referral. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Stevenson has seconded. Okay, so there's a referral on the floor, and I will look for speakers to the referral, and I see Deputy Mayor Lewis's hand up. So before I go to Deputy Mayor Lewis on the referral only, did you want to speak specifically to the referral, or you've said your piece? Okay. Okay. Okay, I will go to the Deputy Mayor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I'm going to be brief. Colleagues, please defeat this referral. Not only is it an unnecessary delay, and as I said, we're never going to get unanimity in the sector, but we do have support. We have been making investments and drawing down on this fund, but more importantly, a referral for 1 month and then to suggest that we would start it sooner. While Ms. Barbone said the absolute fastest we could fast track it would be 3 months, I ask you to respectfully keep in mind, our finance team is in the middle of putting together the annual budget update for this council's consideration and deliberation in just a few weeks' time. That's a massive amount of work, as we know. And now we're going to ask them to do this work on top of that and come back in one cycle. When the annual budget update is done, they have to move into the assessment growth allocation reviews and bring that forward to us a few weeks after that. So I don't think it's fair because a couple of hoteliers don't like it. And again, I'm really resisting the urge to name them because I know who they are. To delay and ask our staff to do additional work at one of the busiest times of the year for them because there are a couple of individuals who object to this. You've heard the support from other really key tourism assets. The airport, which just brought over 50,000 people in partnership with London Air Show to our city, people who stayed in those hotels. The Grand Theatre has a season this year, which will have overnight visitors with heads in beds because we used this accommodation tax to help them replace their boiler. And Bud Gardens that will be bringing 9,000 people a night every Friday night for hockey games and everything else that they do through the season. Tens of millions of dollars invested in updating that. This is a political decision. This is not an industry decision. So let's do our job and make a political decision today, not refer this. Either just vote yes or no.
Okay, thank you. I have a list building. I will go to Councillor Pribble next, and then I'll go to Councillor McAllister and Councillor Pelosa. Councillor Pribble.
So when we talk not an industry decision, political decision, there are 2 local associations and neither one of them and their representatives said that they were aware this is coming forward.
Sorry, a point of order, Madam Chair. Has the seconder of this motion left the meeting?
Just a moment, I'll confer with the clerk. After conferring with the clerk, the motion is in the possession of the committee, and it doesn't matter if the seconder is present. I'll go back to Councillor Purgle.
So going back to it, I really honestly, and there's one thing is actually that both organizations and 4 different hoteliers, it's not that they would not be, that they would be totally opposed to it, or they didn't say, yes, we don't want it. It doesn't make sense. They just don't feel that as a sector that they're receiving a direction from us and not conversation. And they want to be actually heard. I attended a few of their meetings during this year, and they want to be heard. And again, it's not that the ones that have stated it, they said, we are against it. We are not going to do it. They didn't say it. They might mean it, or they might say it during the conversations, but they did not say that. The thing is that, as we heard, this 3 months, so I know I said referral to the next meeting, but my point is more 3 months for us to implement this. Okay, this is what, 1 year and 4 months that we have time, what's in front of us. They're not asking for 20 reports. They're not asking for 10 meetings. All they're asking for to be heard and to give their input, their feedback, not just on this, but also support of the city, of the issues they have. That's really what it comes down to. So it's not, again, I'm not delaying it. Certainly, the marketing, what I call marketing funds, it's not just marketing funds, it's additional. We have there $4.8 million, so we are not stalling on that. And again, it's not to kick in till January 2026. What I want the sector that has been doing great things for us, if it's a referral or if it's a change afterwards to the motion, all I want them to have the opportunity to be heard by civic administration and to say what they feel would help them as the collectors of this tax for us.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor McAllister next, followed by Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, and through the presiding officer. And, you know, I hear both sides in this. Appreciate the discussion that's gone on. I'm not willing to support the referral. I'm willing to make a decision, as the deputy mayor said. I do think this largely is a political decision. Looked at what the other cities are doing in the area. I think it's fair in terms of what we're looking at with the MAT. I think in terms of the answer they've given with Tourism London, I think there are a lot of opportunities to utilize these funds. As again, the deputy mayor said, we've drawn on those funds very recently to support a lot of our assets throughout the city. So I will be voting against this referral. I would like to vote on the main motion and support it. But I would also like to say, I mean, in terms of the associations, if they want to be heard, I'm more than willing to hear them out at council. If they want to have a delegation, there's also the opportunity to have conversations between now and council. Again, you know, I'm happy to have those conversations, but I do think, you know, again, I think we're unfortunately behind everybody else, and I do think that we need to support this and give Tourism London those funds to support these very valuable things to our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder to Councillor, we don't have delegations at council, but I hear your point. In between, there is opportunity for conversations. I did also have Councillor Cuddy on the list, correct? Okay, so I'm going to go to Councillor Pelosa and then Councillor Cuddy.
Thank you. I won't be supporting the referral. And as you said, there's no delegations at council, but they're welcome to always send in correspondence or have meetings outside of this. I'll also note that we were advised that hotel stays have exceeded pre-COVID levels as well, which was one of the things that led us to doing this, that the beds were in beds. And through Ms. Finn's conversation with some hoteliers, we knew there were some questions, and Deputy Mayor Lewis and myself have already reached out through Tourism London a while back, that if there was questions, we were happy to set up a meeting with those with questions to come and talk about Tourism London's portion of the MAT, the City of London's portion, and what we're doing, what we have done, and what we can continue to do together. Just for those conversations were already in play months ago.
Thank you. I will go to Councillor Cuddy next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I won't be supporting this referral, and I will be supporting the main motion. it seems that whenever we don't want to make a decision, we ask for referral, and that's not fair to us, it's not fair to our constituents, and it's not fair to our staff. To Deputy Mayor Lewis's point, this is something, we're at the bottom of we're at the low end of other cities who are increasing their taxes because they need to. And this isn't a case, Madam Presiding Officer, where people aren't going to come to the city because we've raised it by a point. They're going to come to the city anyway, and they're going to enjoy dining and overnight accommodations. And it's 1 point, and it's not going to make a big difference. So I will be gladly, I will be voting against the referral, and I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the referral? Okay, Counselor, you have a less than 2.5 minutes. Go ahead.
I don't think I'm very clear because everything that was said, even including the last two councillors, I don't agree. I don't disagree with them. But again, we have a group, and I'm going to repeat it again. We have a group that's collecting tax for us, funds for us. We have a group that feels they are not being heard, they are being just directed. We have an opportunity. Again, we are not losing the time. Again, it's from 1st of January. So when I heard here that, again, it's an opportunity of the funds, there isn't till January 2026. There is no additional funds on the table whatsoever. We heard from our staff that it will take 3 months to implement. And we are not giving an opportunity to the group that has been doing a great job for us last 6 years to be heard. They didn't even say, I hear here that they say they are against it, the increase. They never even said that. They didn't make it such a statement. All they ask is, before you give us a direction, let's talk. Let's talk with the staff, let's talk. And that's all they're asking for. So whatever I heard here from from other councillors that we are losing money, that there's this, that's not true. January 2026, we are not touching anything till then. If there's other one that have different suggestions, all I want them, before we do this direction of 1% increase, all I want this group to be heard. That's all they want.
Okay, thank you. I have Deputy Mayor Lewis on the referral. You have 2 minutes and 24 seconds remaining.
I promise not to use it all, because I keep hearing all they want is to be heard. And respectfully, read Clause C. Civic administration be further directed in consultation with Tourism London, and these associations have representatives on the Tourism London board, to report back to the appropriate standing committees with recommendations to council for any updates to the Tourism Infrastructure Reserve Fund allocation policy and strategic investments. If they don't like or don't think that the way the money is being spent is benefiting them, Clause C gives them the opportunity to participate. So they have a chance to provide feedback, to come and talk. They've had a chance since April to provide feedback and come and talk. It's not about how much, if it's about how the money is being spent, whether it's the MAT allocation, which has a great policy that other municipalities are actually copying to use, that Tourism London has established for how its 50% is used. And take a look at Kingston's. It's a carbon copy of ours because our staff did a great job, the Tourism London staff did a great job of creating that. But that is what Clause C is about. It's not, there should be no discussion with the industry about whether we're having it at 4% or 5% because they're not paying it. They're collecting it from a bill. We're deciding what the tax rate is. If they want to have a conversation about how it's being spent, that is exactly what Clause C does. And that says report back to the appropriate standing committees. So whatever timeline that is, doesn't matter. It's about getting the 1% increase directed so that staff have the time outside of the annual budget update process to go through the steps and not on a 3-month fast track, but to be able to balance that with all their other work to bring forward the increase so that it can take effect. Had we really wanted to just do this without consultation, we would have brought this forward to you in April and said, make it effective January 1, 2025, and given the staff the summer to work on it. but we didn't. We've taken the time to ask around, to have some conversations. And there's an opportunity for further conversations in Clause C.
Thank you. Any further speakers on the referral before we call the vote? Seeing none in chambers and no one piping up online, we'll look to open the vote.
Closing the vote, motion fails, 1 to 13.
Thank you. You want me to keep the chair for the rest, or you? Okay, thank you. All right, so on the main motion, just looking for any additional speakers. I see Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Trosso. Go ahead, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Chair. And I want to thank Councillor Pribble, first of all. As much as I didn't support the referral, I did appreciate the conversation. This is committee. This is where we are able to debate and understand motions coming forward. Ms. Finn, I think what sold me in terms of supporting this increase, because the fact that other cities are doing it wasn't a big selling feature for me. But when I hear what the Tourism London is doing in our city, the increase in tourism, the support of our city being a UNESCO music city, all those things matter, and it does tell me that Tourism London is doing a great job, so thank you for that. Also, what else sold me on supporting this 1% increase was the fact that infrastructure is increasing, and the cost to replace, be it boilers or renovations, is going to be harder to obtain, to get that funding, and our organizations are going to be challenged. So this is an opportunity where we can spread that wealth. I'm glad that C is included in the motion. I would encourage the industry, the hotel groups out there to reach out to us at standing committees and to us on our phones, and to share their concerns with us as well. Those are still opportunities that they have to go forward, and I'll be supporting this motion, and again, appreciate the debate we've had here.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Trosso.
Well, the one concern I want to raise, and I'm not going to put anything on the table right now because I think this is a bigger discussion we have to have, but I'm really worried about the leakage and the loss of revenue that we're not getting from the Airbnb in this industry. We've spoken, I've raised some of my concerns about the enforcement of our Airbnb bylaw. I'm not going to put something on the table now, but.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just remind you to tie it back into the conversation on the map.
I am going to tie it back into the conversation on the map, because I think that there's a certain equity for the hoteliers. And if people can go off to Airbnbs and not go to hotels, knowing that the Airbnb industry is not complying with this, that's a fundamental question of unfairness. And again, I'm not putting anything on the table now. I just want to mark my dissatisfaction with what I perceive to be happening. And I would like to see a report on that. That's a different committee, and I'll just leave it at that. But I had to say something about the Airbnb industry.
Thank you. Councillor Pribble next. I do not have the original speakers list, so I do not know how much time you have remaining. But while you're speaking, we'll figure that out.
I don't think I'm going to be very long, though. By the way, I do agree with Councilor Trosso just said, this Airbnb's 100%. I just want to let you know, I just want to reiterate a couple of things. Tourism London, these funds for our municipality, for Tourism London, are fantastic. 100% support of it, was supported right from the beginning. You know, any initiatives that came, doesn't matter if it was the Grand Theater, if it's the bids, makes complete sense, and it's great. Benefits Tourism London, doing a great job in it, maximizing these funds, all great. I'll tell you right now, if the industry would know that this is in front of us today, I would have voted yes, yes, yes. That's not my point. I'm even supportive of it, the 5. My thing is that the industry that's collecting these funds for us, they were surprised. Sorry, no, they are still surprised today that this is in front of us on the table today. That's all it's about. So again, if they were aware of it, I'm all for it. And again, we see it here in the motion in terms of other municipalities. It makes sense. That's not the point. The point is that they're collecting for us and they have something, you know, I always call it kind of the best decisions are not made about you without you. And this is the thing that that I felt they weren't heard. Is it a good thing for our city, municipality, Tourism London? Absolutely it is. That was the only point I was trying to make. That we are deciding, and the sector who is collecting it for us is not aware of it, that we are deciding today. That's all it was about. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the main motion? Seeing none here and no one speaking up online, I will look to call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion carries 13-1.
Thank you. I will return the chair to Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and thank you for steering us through that piece of our debate today. Colleagues, that concludes our public agenda. We've made our way through our consent, our items for direction, and our deferred matters. We do have one matter to be discussed in closed session. That is a labor relations, employee negotiations, land acquisition, disposition, solicitor, client privilege advice matter. And so I'm going to look for a mover to take us into confidential session, and that's been moved by Councillor Rahman and seconded by Councillor Stevenson. And we will ask the clerk to open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So we will just get the appropriate people in the room, let everyone else exit the room and secure the doors, and then we will go right into our confidential item. Colleagues, I'm going to call the 14th meeting of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee back to order from our closed session, and I will turn to Vice Chair Rahman to report out.
Thank you. I'm happy to report that progress was made on the item we went in camera for.
Thank you, Councillor. That concludes our agenda. So all we need now is a motion to adjourn, and that is moved by Councillor Ferreira and seconded by Councillor Stevenson, and by hand. All in favor?
Motion carries.
Thank you, colleagues. We are adjourned.